Chapter 31, Prehistoric Aviators of the Andes. Our readers know that the Wright brothers were the first men to fly a heavier than air craft, but another set of brothers, Jacques and Joseph Montgolfier, are credited with having successfully piloted the earliest hot air balloon in late 18th century France. Virtually every chronology of aviation is based on these two historic facts. One of them, however, is a fallacy. Aircraft aficionados are mostly unaware that the first fully documented human flight took place 74 years before the Montgolfier brothers. The true honor instead goes to Bartholomew de Gussamao, pronounced Gusamao. On August 8, 1709, he readied a small skiff made of woven reeds attached by thin, sturdy cords to a huge triangular envelope made of cotton and paper. When fully inflated, resembled an irregular pyramid. John V, King of Portugal, watched with his assembled court and a great crowd of spectators as a small fire filled the envelope with smoke. Gusamao hopped aboard La Passarola, the Sparrow, which, to the amusement of spectators on the ground, rose vertically and majestically to about 60 feet in the air, then drifted with a mild wind more than a mile from Lisbon Castle of St. George to the House of India. Landing gently on the lawn of the Colonel Office to wide popular acclaim and royal favor, the pilot was hailed as El Voyador, the Flying Man. King John personally granted him a patent for La Passarola, the military potential of which was even then apparent by its debut, which was recorded by Vatican archives as the first successful flight in human history. But El Voyador's glory was short-lived, as was he himself. Hounded by politically powerful religious fanatics who condemned his invention as a blasphemous device of the devil that enabled sinful man to storm heaven, Gusamao fled to Toledo, Spain, where he died impoverished and forgotten at age 38. Not until the advent of the Wright brothers' first heavier-than-air flight was the Portuguese flying man's achievement rediscovered, ironically enough, by French researchers who found a conflicting claim to the world's first aviation honors held by their own national heroes, the Montgolfier brothers. The story of 1709's previously neglected exploit became so popular that the Aeronautical Academy of Bartholomew de Gussamao flourished in Paris from the turn of the century through 1920s. Until the economic crash of 1929, its members raised substantial funds for commission of a large monument, then shipped it to his Brazilian birthplace, where it stands to this day neglected. An elaborate bronze plaque commemorating the flight shows a large triangular-shaped balloon flying over Old Lisbon. Beneath are inscribed the words, "The empire of the skies was reserved for the gods until it was conquered by man on August 8, 1709. That's interesting. The empire of the sky was reserved for the gods? Yeah, flying around in their ships. That's an interesting thing to be on a statue, isn't it? See, the guys at the highest levels, it's just a fact to them. Academy members underwrote two additional memorials, one in Lisbon to honor the date and place of the Sparrow's inaugural flight, the other in Toledo at the Aero Pioneer's grave. They even had a medal struck to celebrate the bicentennial of his unprecedented achievement. The Academy could not survive the worldwide financial depression of the 1930s, however, and turbulent events of the following decade consigned Gusamao once again to oblivion, except for a commemorative stamp issued by the Brazilian government in 1944. Not until 33 years later was his fame resurrected by an American balloonist, James Woodman, whose work in South American archaeology brings us to a far greater mystery than the disregard still surrounding his 18th century predecessor's singular accomplishment, with which it is nonetheless strangely linked. During the early 1970s, Woodman became fascinated with the so-called Nazca Lines, the largest art gallery on Earth. This collection of outsized designs, some geometric, others portraying a variety of animals, was created by removing dark gray top cover to reveal faint yellow sand just beneath the Peruvian desert. Uncertainly bracketed with the perimeters of the 3rd century BC and 5th century AD, pre-Inca Nazca civilization is poorly understood by archaeologists. Their only clues are vividly decorated pottery remnants, massive sophisticated subterranean aquifers associated with its people, and colossal geoglyphs scattered across the arid plain. These images were not discovered until the early 1930s, and then by accident. When a local pilot happened to fly over the figures, which had gone unnoticed until then, all are superbly executed in perfect proportion, some several miles in length, demonstrating an exceptionally high degree of skill in surveying techniques, social cooperation, and the ability to accurately transfer artwork from normal-sized sketches to a gigantic scale. The Nazca lines were popularized by Erich von Däniken, the ancient astronaut theorist who insisted that they had been laid out many thousands of years ago by visitors from another planet as runways for spaceships. Although Woodman dismissed this juvenile fantasy, he nonetheless believed that the pteroglyphs could only be appreciated from an aerial perspective. At the other extreme, mainstream scholars assumed that they were sacrificial offerings only, not made to be seen by their creators, but meant for viewing exclusively by the gods who lived in the sky. I love how they can't see that that's one and the same. Idiots. Such conventional speculation, as baseless as it is unconvincing, did not sit well with Woodman, who was unable to shake off the logical, no less officially impossible conclusion that the ancient South Americans had somehow achieved manned flight, the only means by which they could observe their gargantuan art tableau spread across the Peruvian desert. It did not make sense to him that they should have gone to the immense trouble of executing such a large collection, only to deny themselves any opportunity of ever seeing it. No matter how deep their devotion to the gods, the very notion seemed contrary to fundamental human nature, regardless of cultural and temporal differences separating our times from the prehistoric Nazca. Woodman began researching possibilities, however unlikely, for pre-Columbian aviation, an investigation that led him to the forgotten story of Bartolomeu de Gusmão, a no less mysterious figure, it turned out, than El Vorador's own early 18th century balloon. Born 1685 in Brazil of Portuguese parents, Gusmão was educated at his native city of Santos by Jesuit fathers. It's so crazy. I did not know that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever even heard of this Gusmão guy before. But I don't know what it was when I was reading that part a minute ago when they said that they mentioned Erich von Däniken being, the guy talking about the Nazca lines, and all I could get in my head was that clip of von Däniken from Coast to Coast AM where he says, "And yes, I was trained by the Jesuits." So isn't that an interesting coincidence that somehow this Gusmão guy, the story of him is somehow connected to these ancient aviators of Brazil, and he would be Jesuit trained just as von Däniken is. Very, very interesting stuff. And again, when you see the connections to this ancient alien stuff and this the people who seem to be the experts having extensive ties to the order of the Jesuit they train agents. And they train their agents not to be out and outwardly appear that they are working for the priest class, but they indeed are. But part of their training, part of the Jesuit training, is training them to be good actors. And it's funny when you look at how many actors, there are connected. I mean, from Charlie Sheen, and what about that clip I have where Alex Jones' own wife says, he's a great actor. Oh, and he just happens to be friends with, Hutton Gibson, Mel Gibson's father, former Jesuit priest. On and on and on with the connections. Of course, he's had John McManus on. John McManus was Jesuit trained as well. So always these connections to, conspiracy stuff and all this and ancient alien stuff with these priest class Jesuit guys. He complemented his advanced education with them at their seminary in Belém, where he excelled in languages, mathematics, and physics. It is important to understand that the Jesuits were great explorers of Brazil and the rest of South America. Motivated by missionary zeal, they traveled throughout the continent where no modern Europeans had ever gone before. Right. Under the guise of going there to, they're going on a mission. They're missionarying, going down and trying to spread the word, the gospel. Bullshit. Those guys were on expeditions to find knowledge and to find artifacts, just like everybody else that does those expeditions is. And they do it under the guise of, missionary work. That's bullshit. It is all missionary work from the Catholic Church has always been a front to set up these and find these artifacts that may, present themselves as a problem to their religious hierarchy. The Catholic Fathers studied native myths, customs, and behavior, then passed the information on to their students as aids to successful evangelism. As part of his schooling, Gushmal not only heard cultural news from the friars, but participated in several jungle expeditions himself. Either during one of these missionary forays or from veteran Jesuit accounts, young Bartholomew learned some very peculiar details about the natives of the rainforest. Oh, shit. Motherfucker. Y'all seeing where this is going? So this guy, wow, that's telling, isn't it? That's a microcosm for the much larger stuff with the Jesuits I've been screaming about for almost 5 years now. Because this guy goes on these missionary expeditions to Peru and Brazil. Somewhere along the way, he comes into some ancient knowledge. And what's he do? He takes this ancient knowledge, applies it, and becomes the first man to fly. All with information he gained from these people who had advanced knowledge. So that right there, folks, is very telling and very much proves what I've been saying for years and years and years, is that these quote-unquote missionaries are never on a mission to spread the gospel. They were there to gain information, to use, and to absorb into their priest class, and then report back to their masters, who and the masters and war generals who are in the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And you think it's a coincidence that all the people that were funding Contras for the eradication of the indigenous populations there to take and spread Christianity to them, you think it's a coincidence that all the people involved in Iran Contra, from Oliver North to Pat Buchanan to Larry Pratt and on and on and on, all just happen to be members of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta? Not a coincidence at all. The Jesuits, that's why the Jesuits are kind of, they're not the guys getting their hands dirty. There's a clip in Secret Rite Volume 2 that's very telling, and that's exactly in my research what I've found. These guys are the brains. They're not the brawn. The Jesuits are the brains. They're the information holders. They're the knowledge keepers. They're the ones that formulate plans and plans of action and strategies that serve the agenda. And the Sovereign Military Order of Malta is the end that executes said plans. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this guy goes and learns all this stuff from the natives and becomes the first man to fly. Huh. So what's that say about the information that these natives had? Far more important than just a bunch of savages, I'd say, don't you? But again, where'd they get it from? And, you're going to find that out once my Volume 1 of The Lost Secrets of Ancient America is done. So, again, please help us to get this done. Very important work. Every time I read more and more of this book, it just feels like not in a bad way, but it just feels like another weight on my shoulder. Like, man, you got your work cut out for you here. Not in a bad way. I got this. Don't worry about it. As long as I get the sport ID, I got this down. But man, it's just so much info, and trying to absorb it all and process it, and then also trying to make it and put it into film. It kind of takes me some time to sort of absorb all this before I can just take it and make it work in the film, because you got to make sure it fits in with everything else that you've already been researching and doing. So it's, as I've described before, It's like taking making a film is like taking a 10 million piece jigsaw puzzle, throwing all the pieces up in the air and, trying to put it together. These were, he was told that several otherwise backward tribes in Brazil and Peru were skilled in the manufacture of curious objects. They were 5-foot-tall envelopes of paper that could fly, filled with smoke rising from small clay pots of smoldering cane suspended underneath a single opening. The contraptions actually rose into air of their own accord. When questioned by the astounded friars, the Indians explained that the little hot air balloons comprised a legacy for their most ancient ancestors and were flown only for religious purposes, bringing small offerings to the sky gods. In spring 1709, Gushmal appeared in Lisbon with his own flying model. Because of its successful performance before a royal committee, the Jesuit priest from Brazil was financially encouraged to proceed with the completion of a full-size version that carried him aloft for the first time a few months later. When Woodman learned of this lost achievement, he was particularly intrigued as an archaeologist. See, he goes and finds it. They go on this supposed mission. Oh, we're going to go do missionary work to the ancient tribes. No. They go and do missionary work. He brings back this knowledge of how to make this flying machine, brings it back, makes it, it works, and then what's the first thing that is said to him as soon as he lands on the ground? I read it earlier in the chapter. As soon as he lands on the ground, just as you would expect, the first thing out of the first person's mouth that he sees is, oh boy, wow, think about the military applications of this. So boom, again, that would go into the hands of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, the Knights of Malta. See how this is done? It's no different today. It's no different today. They're the brains. The Jesuits are the brains. The Knights of Malta are the brawn. And the white Pope Vatican stuff is all the front, front man distraction horse shit. That's all it is. The Pope is just there to be the front man like Obama or Bush or anything else. While meanwhile, the real power players are in the background. They're not on TV. They're not out, talking to the flock. They're doing the work. Where did I leave off? When Woodman learned of this lost achievement, he was particularly intrigued as an archaeologist by El Vorador's apparent indebtedness to the Brazilian natives for the triumph of La Pessoa. Further research disclosed that at least one Indian tribe, today in residence near the Honduran border, still make ceremonial aerostats like those the Portuguese missionaries saw fly 300 years ago. Investigation of Peruvian myth revealed additional clues. The Incas, Woodman discovered, honored a deity they referred to as Oricon, or Orichan, who could fly between heaven and back in a vessel of golden flames, imagery implying a gondola equipped with its fire pot suspended beneath a hot air balloon. Even more suggestive was the ancient Andean hero Artaquai, the boy god who reconnoitred for Incan armies by flying high over battlefields and returning to the emperor with intelligence about army dispositions. The myth of Antarqui lends credence to the possibility that Andean lads, because of their light weight, were used to fly military observation balloons. Boys actually did serve as military observers while strapped to large leather-made kites for Greek armies in the field some 200 years before the advent of Nazca civilization. The first such aerial reconnaissance had been invented by Archichets of Tantarum, a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, statesman, and strategist around 400 BC. The following century, unmanned hot air balloons were being flown over China. It is possible, then, that similar contemporaneous advances in aviation were undertaken by pre-Columbian South Americans. Better known than Antarqui was Kontiki Viracocha, the Incas' red-bearded, light-complected, fair-eyed sounding father who fled as a flood survivor from some natural catastrophe. Yeah, Viracocha. There he is, red beard, light-complected. Sea foam, a reference to his white skin and oceanic origins, probably an Atlantean, allegedly shared the high wisdom of his lost homeland with native peoples to create Andean civilization. Among the cultural gifts he bequeathed was the aerostat, or hot air balloon. A standard image in Nazca art may be a direct reference to, and in fact a symbol for this gift. The likeness of a sea eagle or frigate bird appears as the single most reproduced animal throughout Peru's Pacific coastal pottery remnants. The bird is remarkable for its ability to inflate its gullet to a grotesque size in midair, resembling a balloon in flight. Most Nazca drawings depict birds, likewise suggesting flight. Of these, the most cogent to our investigation is a half-human image, the so-called Owl Man, regarded as one of the oldest bioglyphs. It portrays a standing 98-foot-long anthropomorphic figure with the head of an owl incised into the sloping face of a cliff. Like its companions, the ground drawing may be properly appreciated only from the perspective of altitude at several hundred feet. Its gestures with his right hand lifted toward heaven while its left points toward the earth. It is as though the figure were indicating something integrally important concerning all Nazca lines. If you want to see us properly, you have got to go into the sky. Owlman is a misconceived name, however, because it appears to have been originally associated with a sorceress similarly portrayed on Nazca pottery and still revered by mountain Indians. Often shown holding a San Pedro cactus in her left hand, she was and is worshipped as a supernatural guardian of highland lagoons where the plant grows. Well, yeah. Hello? Hello? Let me tell you something right now, buddy. You do enough San Pedro cactus, your ass is going to be out there carving fucking shit into the rock thinking you're talking to the gods, too. Because San Pedro cactus is what they derive mescaline from. That's a fact. I mean, I wouldn't tell you you can go down to Home Depot and buy you a San Pedro cactus for $26 and extract the mescaline out of it, eat it, and trip balls if you really wanted to, but, you know, you could if you were so inclined. I wouldn't suggest it, though. This hallucinogenic cactus, when ingested, makes possible the well-known flight of the shaman. An out-of-body experience shamans use to soar up to the gods for healing and wisdom. Containing mescaline, the San Pedro cactus does indeed produce convincing sensations of flight in anyone who ingests it. Fuck him! If he thought he could fly, he should have started from the ground. Bill Higgs, young man on acid, jumped out of a window today. It's a good point, though. You know, that's always my thing. You know, if you're on hallucinogenic drugs and you are going to try to fly, again, always try to start from the ground, okay? Don't go up on a building. Bad news. Whether the desert drawings imply drug-induced astral projection or balloon flight, an aerial experience related to the glyphs seems suggested. Even non-avian depictions point to a connection with the heavens. The dog and fox, both portrayed on the Nazca Plain, were symbolic messengers between divine spirits above in the sky and human worshippers below on the ground. Woodman was especially surprised to find that Quechua, the language spoken by the Incas, actually contains a pre-modern word for balloon maker. Moreover, some surviving examples of pottery recovered from the vicinity of the Nazca geoglyphs portray objects resembling balloons flying across the sky, trailing ropes or streamers. Nazca tapestries housed at Lima's National Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology unquestionably depict humans in flight, either through the agency of hallucinogenic pathogens or via balloons. No, see, I don't think it's either one. I think it represents these sky gods coming down and giving the humans these drugs to communicate with the gods, because there's an intimate connection between these quote unquote gods and drugs of all sorts. You got to understand, folks, down there where that area, Peru, you know what that is, right? That's Blow Central, baby. And the natives were said to have been given the cacao plant from the gods. It was considered to be a drug of the gods. And they have found, you can go Google the cocaine mummies. Go Google that. The cocaine mummies. And they, there again, more ancient people found buried with mass amounts of drugs. So I also the people in South America, the ayahuasca shaman who make the ayahuasca mixture out of DMT. Do you know how many different alkaloids and roots and things there are in the jungle? Millions. Do you know what the chances and the odds are of finding the two specific alkaloids you need in a rainforest and a jungle to mix together to make the visionary herb ingredients to make the alkaloids for DMT that are found in ayahuasca? 1 in quadrillion trillion chances. They got this information from these sky gods, and again, they always present you with one side or the other, and I always find that the one side or the other they present you with is never the truth. They, here the example is, well, this either depicts people tripping balls or this depicts, humans flying for real or flying because they're tripping balls. And I think it actually represents these sky gods giving the people these visionary herbs as a communication device. At the Nazca Lines themselves, broad patches of scorched earth may still be observed at the intersects of drawings or atop nearby low-rises. They are the results of intensely hot fires that burned when Nazca civilization flourished in the area. Woodman wondered if these fires were originally ignited by pre-Columbian aviators to inflate their balloons with hot air. Putting this speculation to the test, Woodman and his colleagues, fellow professional balloonists from the United States, built a hot air balloon designed to resemble Gushmal's sparrow and the deltoid miniature still flown by Andean natives. The American scientists restricted their experiment to materials known to have been used by pre-Inca peoples. These included finely woven textiles, straw ropes, and a reed boat of the kind well known from Bolivia's Lake Titicaca, which served as the most likely gondola. Even the ground fires for providing hot air were stoked only with desert wood close at hand. Nothing belonging to modern times was included in the undertaking. At dawn on November 25, 1975, the massive envelope of Woodman's balloon, Condor 1, inflated with 80,000 cubic feet of smoke, then ascended at 18 feet per second, bearing Woodman and companion aloft to almost 400 feet above the Nazca Plain. From that altitude, the awe-inspiring drawings of a vanished prehistoric race came into perfect perspective and proportion. As Woodman later wrote, the sun had just cleared the mountains and now flooded the fantastic scene below. Surely I thought the men who created these lines had to have seen them like this, with the shadows of dawn etching their magnificent art. For those 2 minutes we were alone with Nazca. We had flown back in time as much as we had climbed into the sky. After the 20th century balloonists bumped down to a soft landing in the desert, one of them remarked, "Up there, just now, I had the feeling we weren't the first ever to have flown with the wind above Nazca." Woodman capably demonstrated that the ancient Peruvians could have manufactured and flown a hot air balloon. They actually did so was not proved, but Condor 1's success, the model aerostats flown for unknown centuries by native South Americans, for whom Gushmal seems to have obtained the prototypes for his balloons, and Andean traditions of human flight, the remains of ancient bonfires of the geoglyphs themselves, and the fact that the lines there may only be properly appreciated from several hundred feet above them, persuasively argue on behalf of Peruvian flight during the ancient past, that a people sophisticated enough to create Andean civilization should have possessed the ability to achieve human flight may lie outside the box of modern archaeology, but appears to be nonetheless true. The Nazca hot air balloons were certainly the privilege of upper-class passengers, perhaps reserved exclusively for royalty. Flights were probably undertaken for religious purposes during important sky-worshipping ceremonies in view of the geoglyphs' apparent astro-spiritual significance. Doubtless such ventures were also regarded as an elite sport. Anterque's myth likewise appears real enough, and we may believe that boys were indeed used additionally for airborne military reconnaissance by the Nazcans, just as history records they were by their nearly contemporaneous Greeks. Though official critics continue to sell short the abilities of prehistoric man, An ancient astronaut theorist endeavored to deprive him of his early achievements by assigning them to anonymous extraterrestrials. The Wright brothers may not have been the first Americans to have flown at all. So that's the end of Chapter 31. Next time we'll get into Chapter 32, West Virginia's Ancient Highway to Nowhere. All right, Chapter 32, West Virginia's Ancient Highway to Nowhere. Although Rome was famous as the great road builder of the ancient Old World, similar accomplishments in pre-Columbian North America have been forgotten. When the first explorers and pioneers arrived in the upper Monongahela Valley of present-day West Virginia, they found significant physical evidence that a mysterious pre-Columbian race of people once inhabited the area. Of particular interest was the discovery of an ancient engineering site, a prehistoric road laboriously constructed from knapped stone, crushed mussel shells, and clay tamped into a hard surface. That's interesting, isn't it? Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about different materials brought together to make one solid piece of stone. Boom, here we go. Connection right there to our rock wall builders. The ancient road was 12 miles in length, 14 inches thick, and 9 feet wide, extending from the mouth of the Monongahela River, following the east bank of the Catawba, Marion County. Also within a mile radius on both sides of the river and near present-day Fairmont, were discovered extraordinary archaeological sites consisting of stone structures, mussel shell burial mounds, giant human skeletons. Oh, my goodness. Yep. What'd I tell you? See, I mean, I've got this, folks, I've got this shit so pegged. I've got this stuff so thoroughly researched and so proven that I can take one look now at some piece of evidence. I had not previously read this chapter or known about this evidence at all. I haven't found this yet in my research. That's what's been great about reading this book. And with this book being topical with the current film that I'm doing, to be honest with you folks, I've been able to knock out a good deal of things that will be usable for voiceovers, a good deal of things that has helped me in my research for this film, meaning that when I'm doing the show now, the time at which I'm spent doing the show isn't so much taking time away from my research, because I'm able to, I'm finding out new stuff here. But what's amazing is that I take one look at something like that now and how they were talking about this road was built with these different things brought together. And I said, that's my boys. There they are. These are the guys. These are the rock wall builders and the mound builders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, boom, what do we find out? Right near there, they happen to find what? Burial mounds and what else? Giant human skeletons. Whew. Goodness gracious, folks. Please get in now and support this work, because this is going to be fucking huge. Huge. Bigger than I have any context for. They found extraordinary archaeological sites consisting of stone structures. Stone structures. Boom, there's another one. Another key indicator. Stone structures, mussel shell burial mounds, giant human skeletons, and an earthen fort with mound complex. Numerous artifacts ranging from copper bowls and jewelry to finely worked stone weapons and tools were likewise found here. These prehistoric locations were not the products of human imagination. Evidence for their existence is well documented by credible sources. Reverend Henry Morgan recalled many eyewitnesses who told him of seeing sections of the old Indian Road and said it was made of small broken stones and mussel shell mortar. In some places it was still fairly solid, but mostly it came apart when uncovered and subjected to rain. The road was largely destroyed when grading was laid for the FM&P Railroad. The upper section of coke ovens at Montana Mines was built on the site of the Stone and Mussel Road. I remember the Indian Road well, wrote John J. Prickett. It left the Monongahela River near Pickett's Fort, crossed the edge of the ridge and rejoined the river, and ran to Catawba, where it ended. It was plowed out on the Prickett land, but there has always been a path where it was. A hiking path at present-day Pickett's Fort State Park was designated the Mussel Shell Trail. It was historian Adam O'Heck's opinion, after talking to 23 persons who remembered the stone mussel shell enterprise, that laying of the road had begun just below the mouth of the Tigrit Valley River and ended at Little Creek, Catawba, and that, except for about half a mile on the Prickett's land, it followed the east bank of the river very near the water from beginning to end. And almost all of it, not destroyed by the railroad construction, had gone underwater when the first locks were built. Local newspaper columnist and historian E. Meredith reported a train wreck on the day before Christmas 1894 and a locomotive and several coal cars at the Montana coke ovens. According to Meredith, Dr. Kramer, an amateur archaeologist from Smithtown, arrived on the scene to help the injured. It was then he made a most interesting discovery. The train, in leaving the tracks, had torn great holes and gashes in the earth. In places, the bedding slag and topsoil had been skinned off. In a space about 40 feet wide and 100 feet long, in this trench-like excavation about 3 feet deep, lay revealed a section of the stone and mussel shell road. Dr. Kramer, a student of prehistoric lore, instantly knew what stood revealed and called attention to the ancient wonder, asking the man in charge to please make certain the site was not disturbed until pictures could be made of it. Dr. Kramer returned with Fairmont photographer Israel Foreman, who helped develop prints of the ancient construction's exposed remnant. A section of the prehistoric road uncovered by the wreck was examined by Dr. Kramer and other investigators. They found that the mussel shell mortar had lost its hold, and it was impossible to remove intact in any part much larger than a man's hand. Several local residents took their own photographs of the exposed section, but all copies have long since vanished. The last reported sightings of parts of the road was made in 1959. So that's the end of Chapter 32. We'll pick up next time with Chapter 33, The Incas More Advanced Than Imagined. Chapter 33, The Incas More Advanced Than Imagined. A crowded party was being held during the 1986 World Science Fiction Convention at the futuristic Hyatt Hotel in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. Over the hubbub of writers and readers and fans, I overheard a young woman conversing about her experiences as an archaeologist in the Peruvian Andes. Drink in hand, I approached her and introduced myself as someone interested in Inca technology. Have you ever heard of the large carved stone that the Incas made? I asked, their model of a topographical landscape, complete with streams and irrigation ditches. It looks like a hydraulic recreation. The Sehuite stone, as it is known, had been featured on a recent television show about Peru, and as an engineer, I was drawn to its implications. She said she was familiar with the carving and added, there are several of them like that. Have archaeologists ever found traces of mercury in any of those sculptured models, I asked, in the channels? Surprised, she replied, as a matter of fact, they have. We've always wondered what it meant. Why do you ask? I know why there's mercury there, I told her. About that time, we were separated by others in the milling crowd and never saw each other again. Our conversation took place nearly 10 years after I read Pharaoh's Pump, a small book by Edward J. Kunkel, and entered into a correspondence with the author, who gave me written permission to rewrite his tome into a more readable version. Mr. Kunkel's thesis held that the inner galleries and rooms of Egypt's Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau are the remnants of a water pumping system originally used for supplying water to a series of locks that raised the colossal monument's ponderous stone blocks during its construction. To test his theory, Kunkel had built a 1/12 scale pumping pipe model of how he thought the King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, Grand Gallery, and various channels and valves and flaps would have performed more than 45 centuries ago. To his delight, the whole thing worked very efficiently, pumping more water than it wastes, the only version of its kind that does. Based on this early dynastic design, he was awarded a United States patent for a hydraulic ram pump. As an engineer with a long-term interest in ancient technologies and prehistoric civilizations, I was impressed by this experimental archaeology approach. Desiring to replicate Kunkel's theories on a tabletop, I envisioned building a Great Pyramid model that could be carried and disassembled to show its hydraulic details, perhaps with a glass plate down the center plane, allowing the fluid flow and operation of the theorized pump and valve system to be observed. But where water worked well enough at Kunkel's large scale, it would not perform identically on a tabletop model, although I was able to drastically miniaturize the dimensions of the Great Pyramid and its features. I could not equally miniaturize the physical properties of water. It has non-scalable properties such as density, viscosity, and surface tension. Within the tiny lines and small chambers of the model I planned, the subtle features of Pharaoh's pump just would not function properly. This is where the science and engineering of scale modeling come in. We have all seen pictures of model airplanes and model rockets inside wind tunnels where variations can be modeled and results measured and then applied to a full-scale item. Hydraulic engineers use similar methods to model the flow around ships, submarines, canals, locks, and other construction, still using water. The important lesson here is that large physical reality can be accurately scaled down to a smaller model of a manageable size. In engineering terms, the applicable value is called the Reynolds number. This is a ratio of certain flow forces. Recalling a college course I had taken on dimensional analysis, I was able to calculate the properties of a fluid that would flow inside a 1 to 300 scale model the way water would in a real pyramid, about 35 times the density of water. The only available fluid that came anywhere close to that density was liquid mercury. Mercury was not perfect, just 13.6 times the density of water, but it was the closest liquid that would work when scaling down the Great Pyramid from 754 feet on a side down to 2.5 feet. If the ancient Egyptians or whoever else may have built the Great Pyramid wanted to make models with liquid mercury simulating water to test their theories and their knowledge, the substance was available to them. The oldest sample of mercury metal dates to about the 15th or 16th century BC. It was found in an Egyptian tomb at Kurna, stored in a small glass container. In my own case, after checking into the price of liquid mercury and finding out about the health dangers in dealing with such a toxic substance, I put the project aside, although I never forgot about using liquid mercury to simulate water in hydraulic models. Later in 1985, when Chinese government officials announced the partial opening of Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi's tomb, who died in 221 BC, photographs were published for the first time of thousands of life-size terracotta warriors that had accompanied their leader into eternity. But what caught my interest was a statement in press coverage to the effect that historians reported the tomb also featured a large topographical model of China, with quicksilver, the various waterways of the empire, the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, and even the great ocean itself, created and made to flow and circulate mechanically. I recalled my pyramid fluid flow modeling attempts and wondered if the ancient Chinese had reached the same conclusion, namely, that in order to simulate the flow of water accurately in a small scale, they had to use liquid mercury. Perhaps it was just the fact that liquid mercury was beautiful and living, and being quicksilver would not readily evaporate as water would, and made a much more attractive scale model of China. However, for an emperor who had spent his reign building canals and initiated the construction on the Great Wall, it would not be surprising if his designers had made use of all the modeling techniques at hand for their plans. In an interesting aside, Emperor Qin apparently died of mercury poisoning, which may have well been related to his tomb-building project, a connection pointed out in this article for the first time. During the intervening years, the remainder of the collapsed tomb site has not been excavated, but I will be waiting to see what the Chinese eventually tell us. If the ancient stories are true and the tomb space itself remained well sealed, ancient liquid mercury could still be there, as well as whatever pumping mechanisms which may have been used. I now work in a government environmental group, and a colleague there used to live in Peru, where he studied archaeology. Recently, he answered my questions about the ability of the Incas to produce liquid mercury by going immediately to the internet and retrieving articles about mercury production in ancient and modern times. He stated that one of the two major sources of mercury in the Western Hemisphere was still in Peru. and that mercury itself can be derived by baking the mineral cinnabar. In fact, he said they used liquid mercury to separate gold from ore, which has been done all over the world since ancient times. They had access to lots of it. Since before the 16th century Spanish conquest, Peruvian cinnabar and mercury have come from a town called Huanacavecola. With this information, I was newly energized about ancient Andean technology. After a few minutes of Googling versions and various terms relating to Inca, stone sculptures, etc., I uncovered photographs of the Sihuite stone located in the village of Conchasa in the Apurimac department or province. True to my memory, there it was, the top half of a stone some 13 feet in diameter, elaborately carved with the model villages, waterways, canals, and irrigation ditches. I examined its details. If this had been intended merely for passive show, as the fabled hydraulic Chinese relief map may have been, it would be essentially two-dimensional. However, I could see that there were many channels for downhill flow, waterfalls, lakes, catchments, and finally a depressed rim around the center perimeter with outlets where the liquid could be caught and reused. To an engineer with some knowledge of fluid flow and a specific knowledge of ancient modeling, this was it. A working, productive hydraulic model that could somehow demonstrate how invaluable water could be directed where it was needed, captured for lakes, slowed for irrigation, and impounded for other uses. Additionally, one of the internet travelogues specifically cited the Sihuite stone. This wonderful monument contains a hydraulic system that allows the deposited water in its superior higher parts to flow through channels and halls, watering all the stone sides. In other words, the model continues to show off its utility. It still works. Detailed inspection of available photographs and drawings of the Sihuite stone reveal many hydraulic features carved into the model, along with somewhat cartoonish representations of human and animal figures. These figures of living creatures may represent designations for different parts of the Inca Empire, much as we today may represent states or regions by vegetation, animals, or large monuments. For example, cactus, buffalo, the Golden Gate Bridge, and so forth. Some internet sources speculate that the Sihuite stone details represent various sites in the Inca Empire. This may be true and truer than they realize, being engineered models of the empire's advanced irrigation systems. Details include terraces, which may stand for the incredible waterworks of Machu Picchu, waterfalls built into many Inca structures, and stepped causeways, which may have been intended to control the velocity of flowing water. The Sihuite stone evidences interlocking fingers, or camelones, that obviously represent the Incas' sophisticated irrigation layouts. It is well established that these ancient waterwork techniques were far superior to those of the invading Spaniards and, in fact, have been readopted lately for greatly increased yields. The next steps in this analysis of ancient technology and technique will require accurate three-dimensional renderings, preferably CAD, with models of the entire surface of the Sihuite stone and any similar Inca inscriptions. It is likely that even more advanced features will be discovered, and this would be proof enough even for hardened skeptics and professional archaeologists. I would expect at the last to find tiny fountains, gate, shut-off valves, and other means of diverting, separating, and mixing flows. Given the advanced concepts of the Inca engineers, I would not be surprised to find expressions of the Bernoulli principle, which governs the velocity and pressure in waterways. Such evidence could include widened corners for slowing down flows and thinner walls indicating reduced pressure in fast-flowing channels. Roman engineers used this knowledge in their advanced waterworks, some of which still stand today. Because of the Inca Empire's wide variety of topography, with its narrow valleys and high cliffs, I would also advise archaeologists to look for strange constructions on this Sihuite model or elsewhere in the field, which might indicate that the Incas had their own version of the hydraulic ram pump that Kunkel favored as a means of building the Great Pyramid. Hydraulic ram features would take the form of narrow channels or tubes running down into the bottom of hollow carved stones, and smaller tubes that exit from these stone domes. Such pottery or stones may exist today, their functions ignored and completely unknown. Whether or not a pharaoh's pump was actually used to build Egypt's Great Pyramid, Kunkel may have been onto something. Ancient engineers all over the world in all cultures were intelligent, practical, and experienced in handling water, the one truly essential resource. This article represents the first time that hydraulic modeling with liquid mercury has been proposed as an ancient technology, as opposed to purely an ornamental feature. It is also the first time that mercury modeling has been proposed as the cause for residue traces of mercury found on the Sahuite stone. To my knowledge, liquid mercury for such hydraulic modeling has not been used since, and I am finally convinced, however, that the ancient Incas used their knowledge of liquid mercury in conjunction with hydraulic modeling to create and study the flow of water. They would have done this to design, improve, and optimize their advanced irrigation techniques and their incredible waterworks systems and their characteristic waterfalls, baths, and fountains. So that's the end of chapter 33. Chapter 34 is, Did Pre-Columbian Americas Master Electricity? Thomas Alva Edison is credited with the discovery of applied electrical power, but other American inventors may have preceded him by many centuries. Although conventional scholars emphatically resist the notion that advanced technologies could not have existed in pre-modern cultures, a growing body of evidence nonetheless suggests that the ancient Egyptians and other ancient peoples employed electricity to light their temples, tombs, and lighthouses during the pre-Christian era. Even years later, but still some centuries before discoveries were made by Thomas Alva Edison, Jerusalem was bathed in the brilliant glow of electric light searchlights casting their beams from windows in the distant Christian Church of the Ascension on the Mount of Olives. The late 7th century Frankish bishop, Arculf of Prigot, who visited and explored the Holy Land accompanied by Peter, a Burgundian monk and guide, described the details and effects of those 8 carbon arc lights. In the words of the Catholic Encyclopedia, St. Bede relates that Arculf, on his return from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land about 670 or 690, was cast by tempest on the shore of Scotland. He was hospitably received by Adaman, the abbot of the island monastery of Iona, to whom he gave a detailed narrative of his travels to the Holy Land, with specifics and designs of the sanctuary so precise that Adamnan, with aid from the extraneous sources, was able to produce a descriptive work in 3 books dealing with Jerusalem, Bethlehem, the principal towns of Palestine, and Constantinople. Adaman presented a copy of his work to Aldfrith, king of Northumbria, in 698. It aims at giving a faithful account of what Arculf actually saw during his journey. As the later joined the zeal of the antiquarian to the devotion of a pilgrim during his 9-month stay in the Holy City, the work contains many curious details and might otherwise have been non-chronicled. The following 2 excerpts from the pilgrimage of Archelaus in the Holy Land reports this translation has been made as literal as possible in passages where the exact rendering was of any controversial or archaeological importance, as in the description of the sites and building. Here follow the 2 excerpts when now Arculf continues to describe one of those buildings, a church on the Mount of Olives. In the western side of the church, we have mentioned before, twice 4 windows have been formed high up with glazed shutters, and in these windows there burn as many lamps placed opposite them, within and close to them. These lamps hang in chains and are so placed that each lamp may hang neither higher nor lower, but may be seen, as it were, fixed to its own window, opposite and close to what it is specially seen. The brightness of these lamps is so great that as their light is copiously poured through the glass from the summit of the mountain of Olive, not only is the part of the mountain nearest the round basilica to the west illuminated, but also the lofty path which rises by steps up to the city of Jerusalem from the valley of Josaphat, and it is clearly illuminated in a wonderful manner even on dark nights. while the greater part of the city that lies nearest at hand on the opposite side is similarly illuminated by the same brightness. The effect of this brilliant and admirable collocation of the 8 great lamps shining by the night from the holy mountain and from the site of the Lord's ascension, as Archive related, is to pour into the hearts of the believing onlookers a greater eagerness of the divine love, and to strike the mind with a certain fear, with vast inward compunction. He also went on to add that this is also learned from the narrative of the sainted Arculf, that in that round church, beside the usual light of the 8 lamps mentioned above as shining within the church by night, there are usually added on the night of the Lord's ascension almost innumerable other lamps, which by their terrible and admirable brightness poured abundantly through the glass of the windows, not only to illuminate the Mount of Olive, but make it seem to be wholly on fire, while the whole city and the places in the neighborhoods are also lit. The ancient electric church lights had to cover nearly a mile to light up that far the side of Jerusalem. Other examples of such bright lights are portrayed on crypt walls under the temple at Dendera, which still serve as a reliable witness to the accomplishments of ancient Egyptians in the field of electric lighting. Did the pre-Columbian inhabitants of this side of the Atlantic likewise enjoy its benefits? Described as the French Isaac Asimov, popular science writer Robert Charroux postulated that ancient Americans may have advanced even beyond Egyptian electric battery technology, as described at length in An Electric Lamp. In his Forgotten World, Scientific Secrets of the Ancients and Their Warning for Our Time, he wrote that there is an abundant evidence showing that in Brazil and all over South America, including Peru, Inca civilization was preceded by an unknown culture, equally powerful and probably more advanced. During 1601, the Spanish writer and traveler Barco Centera visited the ruins called El Gran Moco near the sources of the Rio Paraguay, that is, in the vicinity of the Sete Lagos, the 7 lakes, in the middle of the Mato Grosso, near the modern town of Diamantino in Brazil. He found a kind of large, non-flaming light in good working order. It was certainly not powered by batteries, but it gave light uninterruptedly, and there is reason to believe that the source of the light was chemical and electrical. This is what appears from its description. A column surmounted by a moon or large sphere which brightly illuminated the surrounding area. After describing yet another similarly spherical lamp comparable to our neon or mercury vapor versions, he wrote of the radiant rock of Low, the archaeologist Harold T. Wilkins discovered an extraordinary monument that seems to be related to the ancient spherical lamps. At Huilo, on the Pacific coast of Arequipa, Peru, stands the Tombo del Inca, the tomb of the Inca. It bears an ancient inscription that is said to reveal the location of the entrance to a tunnel leading to the ancient lost world of mysteries and gold, whose hidden door lies foul with gases behind one of Los Tres Picos, the 3 peaks. Wilkins believed that the tunnel is at the southern end of the Atacama Desert in southern Chile. The indecipherable description in phosphorescent at the top of the rock itself gives off a light that is like that of a lamp in El Gran Moxo. Educated at Cambridge University in journalism, Harold T. Wilkins was a renowned investigator, among whose outstanding reportage was coverage of early television experiments during the 1920s. His histories of piracy in British public schools were widely read and honored after publication, but his mysteries of ancient South America and in secret cities of old South America are particularly valuable because Wilkins spent many years in South America as a very active and original researcher. As such, his first-hand description of luminous spheres in Peru underscores the American application of electricity during pre-Columbian times. So that's the end of chapter 34. And next time we're going to be getting into chapter 35, the mystery in the sphere. We're going to be getting into chapter 35 for you here tonight, the mystery in the sphere. The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. The creation of Central America's monumental stone balls by pre-modern people is, in itself, a technological feat of the highest order. But if their suspected function, as posited by the following article, is correct, they could only have been produced by a society in at least some respects scientifically superior to our own. Beginning in the mid-1930s, soon after United Fruit Company workers began clearing hundreds of acres in the hereto unexplored Costa Rican jungle, they stumbled over a strange, dark shape curving out of the ground. Within minutes, their bulldozers excavated a 16-ton ball, 6.5 feet in diameter. Its black, smooth, perfectly round surface was unadorned by inscriptions, illustrations, or marks of any kind. Through the first half of the next decade, an estimated 330 similar stone spheres came to light. Treasure hunters blasted dozens in half with dynamite caps, hoping that gold might be found inside. Instead, the broken spheres revealed only that they were solid rock through to the core. They range in size from the first specimen discovered down to samples the size of a grapefruit and mostly made of gabbro, a coarse-grained equivalent of basalt. Others were sculpted from sedimentary stone, andesite, quartz, feldspar-rich volcanic rock, about 1 dozen from shell-rich limestone, and another dozen from sandstone granite. Well, that's interesting because a lot of those are same materials used in the rock wall. By the way, I wanted to mention this. My brother, Jake, he was looking at Google Earth, looking for some stuff around Rockwall, and he said, man, I found this thing, blah, blah. He was kind of telling me where it was at, and I was like, oh, man. And he was like, what? And I was like, well, the place you're describing, I know exactly where he was describing, where he was going to show me even before he said it. And the area that he was describing, this actually, back before it was as grown up as it is back there, back in the day, me and my dad used to go out in this area and shoot skeet, shoot the guns and shit like that. And it's right next to the East Fork of the Trinity River. And, of course, East Fork of the Trinity River is where there's an underground tunnel that goes from the old Rockwall Courthouse down to the river. And that's right on the land, the very exact land where they found the 2.5-ton garnet stone with the hieroglyphs on it there in Rockwall that has disappeared. And my brother showed me this and found this, and I was able to go back and find it again. And what's crazy, when I brought it up on my Google Earth, I realized that there's right across the river from it, directly across, there's like a little rock outcropping. And I had found that and marked that, but for some reason I hadn't seen this other thing. But it's clearly, ladies and gentlemen, clearly a slate rock roof. A giant piece of slate rock. You can see that it's blue from the Landsat images. And it's right where the original settlement of Rockwall was, right exactly where the 2.5-ton garnet stone was found. And it matches the description of 2 other slate rock walls that were cracked. One in a small town of Heath, which is right next to Rockwall, where supposedly they found the giant skeletons at. And the other was where Lake Ray Hubbard now is in Rockwall, where the guy had cracked the slate rock roof with his tractor as they were digging out the lake, and then his tractor fell in there, not once but twice, and they wouldn't let him retrieve it. So I have found, I know right where this is, too. It's 5 minutes from where I used to live, from where I grew up at, 5 minutes from where my parents live. And I think I'd probably need a 4-wheel drive to get down there, depending on if it was muddy or not. Right now it's so dry, maybe not, but I'm just on fire. I want to get down there and check this out so bad, because you can see it from the images, man. It's a giant. I believe that I have found, or that we have found. My brother helped me find it, but I had already found the same spot right across from it. I believe this to be possibly another one of these slate rock roof that, with something in it to the bottom of it. And I want to get out there and get some video and get some pictures of this, because it matches the description. It also matches the description of one they found in Ohio that had a bunch of giant skeletons in it. And it's right on the bank of the East Fork of the Trinity River, very close to where they found the 2.5, right in the exact spot where they found the 2.5 ton stone with hieroglyphs. So there's something there. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Known locally as Las Bolas, they are very nearly perfect in roundness, varying no more than 2 inches in diameter. More often, that variation is far lower, especially among the largest of their kind. Florida's Dr. Tim McGinnis of the Society of American Archaeology points out, the maximum circumference error in one 6-foot 7-inch diameter sphere is only 0.5 inch, or 0.2%, and he goes on to quote from another researcher, the best spheres are perhaps the finest examples of precision stone carving in the ancient world. The balls are so plentiful throughout the Dyquis Delta region, covering the southern half of Costa Rica, that most of them have been set up as lawn ornaments at private homes or decorative banks and business establishments. A few are on display at the National Museum in San Jose. Others appear in Papagayo on the Nicoya Peninsula, more than 190 miles north of the Dyquis Delta. None anywhere show signs of ever having been engraved, incised, painted, or decorated in any way. McGinnis believes at least 2 have uncharacteristic carvings, but what he takes for celestial maps more resemble natural accretion. During the late 20th century, writers Ivar Zapp and George Erickson tried to show that Costa Rica's lithic mystery was disclosed in its identity as a navigational aid for Bronze Age seafarers from the ancient Old World. Their hypothesis was rendered fundamentally untenable by a globe's self-evident unsuitability as a marker. Moreover, so far as is known, no stone orbs have been discovered near shore where they might have been otherwise seen by sailors. On the contrary, the vast majority of them were deliberately buried much further inland in the depths of the jungle, a location and condition that likewise makes their utility as star charts unlikely to the extreme. 1 or 2 petrospheres have been found placed on mounted cobbled platforms, and a few more were configured into triangular sets of 3, spaced 88 feet apart, although many, maybe most, were deliberately buried, perhaps to preserve them against the deterioration of rain and alternating temperature extremes that have wreaked havoc on Las Bolas since their excavation and exposure to the elements. They were often grouped with whatever general system or alignment mode that arranged them was lost when most were carried away from their original positions. The largest assembly known contained at least 45 balls. 45 balls! The Costa Rican versions are the largest of their kind, although others occur in Zaculel in the Guatemalan highlands, where the largest, 15.5 inches across, was extracted from an early classic Maya strata, AD 200 to 600. Several older Veracruz petrospheres, at least one with a diameter of 3 feet, have been recovered from Mexican sites associated with the Olmec, America's earliest known civilizers, going back to 1500 BC, although some researchers place their beginnings not without cogent reasons to around the turn of the 4th millennium BC. Olmec artifacts are displayed in the garden of Mexico City's Museo Nacional de Anthropologia. Why are you apologizing for your antroness? Anthropologia. A single monumental ball has been reported atop a prominent cliff on a deserted islet off the coast of Haiti. And the Troy Museum in Canakkale, west coastal Turkey, features a line of similar gray granite spheres, each about 2 feet across. What relationship, if any, these various collections may have to each other is not known, but pre-modern stone spheres do not appear at any other locations. Mainstream archaeologists assumed the Costa Rica specimens were made by members of the Aguas Buenas and/or the Dyquis cultures because artifacts from either have been found in the orb's immediate vicinity. This form of inferential relationship dates creation of the Las Bolas from 200 BC to AD 1500, with emphasis on the 8th to 15th centuries, due to a predominance of Dyquis materials, particularly pottery shards recovered from around the stone balls. However, as McGinnis quotes another investigator, one very disturbing mystery emerges in examining the Dyquis culture. The superb stone carving skill necessary for the creation of the spears was not applied to any other object. Indeed, none of the many hundreds of preserved tools employed by the Aguas Buenas or Daiquas were designed to work in stone. They were used exclusively for far more menial tasks, such as scaling fish, stripping bark, or scraping deer hide. These primitive elements and implements never evolved during the 1700 years of Aguas Buenas Daiquas' existence, nor have any pre-Columbian stoneworking tools been found throughout the region. An abundance of surviving Aguas Buenas Daiquas artifactual evidence reveals a materially unsophisticated society relative to contemporaneous Maya civilization, which flourished alongside in Costa Rica. Nor did the Aguas Buenas Daiquas build or operate. Why do you have to have a fucking long-ass name like that? Just call yourselves the ABDs. I don't want to have to say Aguas Buenas Daiquas over and over and over again. Jesus Christ, drive me fucking nuts. Nor did the ABDs build or operate more than primitive watercraft or mostly riverine fishery. Yet petrospheres have been found at several offshore islands, such as the Isla del Cano and the Isla del Coco, which lies 330 miles southwest of the Pacific mainland. Transporting 15-ton, 6-foot-wide globes in wood dugouts or reed skiffs over hundreds of miles of open ocean does not seem likely. Something more in the way of a real seagoing cargo-carrying ship would have been required. Moreover, the granite from which many of the balls were made was not available locally, but had to have been transported from the other side of lofty mountain peaks some 11 miles away. Everything known about the ABDs suggests that they never engaged in the kind of social cooperation necessary to haul what amounted to many thousands of tons of rock over challenging terrain, nor that they ever, in fact, did so. Smaller stone balls, 10 inches to 2 feet across, have been removed from some native burial mounds, and a pre-Columbian cemetery was laid out around a group of spears, implying their mortuary significance. But they appear to have been thus revered by the Indians after inheriting them from a former people. Indeed, concluding that the ABDs were the sculptors based only on observation, that these indigenous peoples dwelled in the same area with the spheres is tantamount to assuming that a Model T Ford parked at an Apache reservation must also have been built by local Indians. But if so, who actually made the stone balls, and when and how and why? Their creators must have been in possession of a higher culture beyond anything known to the ABDs or logically deduced from the petrospheres at Cano and Coco, objects that could have only been carried to these islands by an ocean-going vessel, something neither Indian group possessed. So, too, their precision craftsmanship bespeaks a sophisticated civilization, the identity of which cannot be identified with any known culture throughout the ancient world. Consequently, their age likewise cannot be determined. McGinn is trying to show that Daiquas workers could have cut the wooden template of a semicircle within which to sculpt a rock boulder to size, but results of his experiment were crudely unimpressive, and nothing exists to indicate that the natives ever employed such a method. Among all the many thousands of illustrated pottery shards from pre-Columbian Middle America, not one of them so much as alludes to a petrosphere or the wood template supposedly used to create it. For a better application of Costa Rica's prehistoric achievement, try asking a modern stonecutter to sculpt the circumference of a 15-ton solid granite globe within a 0.2% margin of error. He would probably need something more than a wood template and the kind of tools used by the Daiquas natives to scale fish. As such, no physical evidence exists, including the stone balls themselves, that could tell us anything about them. As Thomas Mann observed, distance in a straight line has no mystery. The mystery is in the sphere. If the who, when, and how of the great globes utterly escapes us, trying to answer the why may broach conclusions conventional scholars refuse to consider. Putting aside all their archaeological references, they do not share some common denominators. They all contain veins of quartz and are located in one of the they're located in one of the world's most seismically active areas. Far to the south along the mountain ridge tops of Peru and Bolivia, a natural phenomenon known as the Andes glow sometimes flits in waves of azure light immediately prior to the onset of major earthquakes. Moving tectonic plates squeeze the mountain's quartz-rich granite to generate a piezoelectrical discharge composed of negatively charged ions that radiate blue light and affect geologists suspect that may release and dissipate at least some seismic energy. Perhaps a similar correlation was made centuries or millennia ago by Andes glow observers who endeavored to reproduce it in quartz-banded balls, the spherical shape of which would have been evenly diffused tectonic pressure. When thus charged, the stone orbs would have been haloed with the Andes glow effect. If so, then the El Gran Moxo lamp and the radiant rock of Yellow, witnessed respectively by Barco Sintera and Harold Wilkins, may have been the same kind of luminous petrospheres found in Costa Rica. In any case, counterparts in Brazil and Peru might be explained by a prehistoric harnessing of piezoelectricity. Now that's interesting. A prehistoric harnessing of piezoelectricity. Just as we've seen in the rock wall and just as we've seen in the Serpent Mound in Ohio. Now that's highly interesting because that's what I've been on to. Somebody prehistorically was harnessing piezoelectrical energy. And when these guys, to me, sound like the same builders, that it tells you right there, yeah, they knew how to gain energy from rocks. Seeding the stone orbs throughout the soil of Costa Rica might have been aimed at mitigating the worst effects of that country's frequent earthquakes by highly advanced civilizers long since lost to time. Until other investigators can offer better evidence to the contrary, Las Bolas stand as mute testimony to the monumental greatness of a vanished people. So that's the end of chapter 35. That's also the end of part 4 of the book. I'm sorry, part 3 of the book. We're now beginning part 4 of the book, Foreigners in Prehistoric America. Now, this I am ready for because this sounds like this is going to further get into what I've been talking about. This is going to get into some of the genetics of what I've been discussing about these ancient people from the Middle East, Mesopotamia, and Europe, and whatever else that were here long ago. So I'd like to get into at least, I don't know how long this chapter is going to be. Let me look. Yeah, that's not very long. I mean, at least get into some of it, if not all of it. Chapter 36, Genetics Rewrites American History Textbooks. The false paradigms of establishment archaeology are based on the unswerving conviction that what is official is incontestable. Ain't that the truth? But this intellectual snobbery is being taken down a peg by the revelations of hard sciences over which academia's living fossils fortunately exercise no control. When Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, 1752 to 1840, first used the term Caucasian in 1795 to describe the white population of Europe, he could scarcely imagine the epic story about to unfold. He was a German physician, physiologist, and anthropologist, among the first scientists to study mankind as an aspect of natural history, and whose teachings in comparative anatomy were applied to the classification of human races. Blumenbach adopted the term Caucasian from native inhabitants of the Caucasus Mountains in southern Europe, a race he believed to be the most beautiful and vigorous on earth. His arguments are no longer fashionable, but there was much more to the story of ancient Caucasians than Blumenbach or anyone else of his time could have imagined. For centuries, there have been reports of ancient Caucasoid peoples thriving in remote corners of the world and then vanishing mysteriously from history. These accounts speak of white, red-haired giants and yellow-haired barbarians in countries now almost exclusively populated by non-Caucasian peoples. In time, modern archaeologists found traces of their existence. Millennia-old corpses found preserved in desert sands or frigid glaciers would ultimately be discovered. In addition to such physical remains, a wealth of historical and mythological evidence, both in written form and oral tradition, spoke of lost civilizations consisting of fair-skinned gods and light-eyed benefactors who helped establish new cultures. According to numerous Native American accounts, at the dawn of their society, they were visited by a great white god, who arrived from a faraway land across the sea. He established their new mode of life, then departed, promising to return someday. The discovery of light-skinned mummies in New Guinea and New Zealand, and persistent references to godlike light-skinned peoples inhabiting a now sunken landmass in the Pacific Ocean, raised some interesting possibilities of just such a primordial race. But the presence of lost Caucasian peoples in the Americas is but the capstone to a much broader reality. Today there exists an overwhelming body of evidence suggesting a now lost population of Caucasians. The last decades of the 20th century saw a revolution in our understanding of the depth and magnitude of prehistoric Caucasian migration and influence. In 1959, for example, hard physical evidence of primitive Proto-Caucasoid peoples in the Americas during prehistory began to surface. Archaeologists digging at Santa Rosa Island off the California coast unearthed a number of skeletal remains dating back to 10,000 BC with apparent Caucasian features. During the 16th century, as Spanish explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo skimmed the same coastline, he found that native Chumash Indians possessed physical attributes that set them apart from the rest of the Channel Island Indians. He reported that the women had fine forms, beautiful eyes, and a modest demeanor, and their children were white, with light hair and ruddy cheeks. Also in the New World, the 1990s saw the discovery of the most controversial archaeological find in North American history, Kennewick Man. Kennewick Man, a 9,000-year-old Native American with clearly Caucasian, not Mongoloid traits. Forensic reconstructions of the recovered skull show a face akin to Patrick Stewart, the actor who portrayed Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Additional discoveries throughout the Americas hinted at primordial Caucasoid population that roamed freely across much of the Western Hemisphere. Kennewick Man. Such discoveries by hard science were not confined to the Americas alone. In the late 1980s, Chinese archaeologists unearthed hundreds of Caucasian mummies along the western frontier of China. Similar ancient corpses located in Mongolia, Siberia, and Central Asia were also discovered. These mummies date back to at least 3,500 BC, and still others appear to be far older, circa 5,000 to 4,000 BC. Not only did they belong to Chinese prehistory, they showed no evidence of Asian ethnicity. That's just describing that. The corpses have been dressed and interred in Western-style clothing and closely resembled Europeans. Later, carbon-14 dating established their original age, placing them at 3,500 years before the advent of the Han Dynasty, 206 BC to 220 AD. They are related to an Indo-European-speaking group of Caucasians known as Tocharians. These prehistoric Chinese remains were unknown to much of the outside world until a security break led to their announcement in 1994. In March 2010, the archaeological community was stunned by the discovery of yet another Caucasian skeleton, this time in Mongolia. DNA extracted from this individual's bones confirmed a direct genetic link to the West. In essence, these remains were clearly European, if not Western Eurasian. This time, however, the ancient corpse was not as old, dating to the 1st century AD. The period of prehistoric Western arrival or habitation in China and East Asia is continually being pushed backward in time to an even earlier date. The origins of some Caucasian mummies trace back to some 6,000 years ago. Some are even older. But the Mongolian individual was apparently held in high regard by his peers as a major player in the Zhangel Empire, a multi-ethnic melting pot of former Eurasian nomads who also challenged Han Dynasty supremacy. This ancient conglomeration of foreign tongues and non-Mongoloid races no doubt consisted of many Indo-European speaking people. During 2007, Peruvian investigators found literally dozens of Caucasian mummies in a vaulted tomb buried 82 feet beneath the forest floor of the Amazon jungle. These belong to a pre-Inca race known as the Chachapoyas, or the Cloud People. Their discovery complemented 16th century Spanish reports of strange white Indians with beards in the same region. Even the giant statues of Easter Island, 2,180 miles off the Chilean coast, bear witness to the arrival and passage of an ancient Caucasoid race. In 1915, British archaeologist Catherine Routledge learned from a native islander the true nature of the long ears, men who came from far away in ships. They saw they had pink cheeks, and they said they were gods. The last real Ariki, or chief, was said to be quite white. White like me, I innocently asked. You, they said, you are red, the color in European cheeks. Red is the term generally applied by Eastern Islanders to Europeans. And Yurakiku is often translated red-haired. Indeed, the towering statues obviously displayed something other than Polynesian physiology. And if the fine oval faces, the large eyes, the short upper lip, and the thin, often Apollo's bow lips are any guide to race, they indicate a Caucasoid race. Anthropologists are baffled by the apparent presence of Caucasoid peoples in the prehistoric Pacific. Genetic testing conducted during the 1990s showed traces of Basque DNA in people in Rapa Nui and Greater Polynesia. These age-old oral traditions are not only being underscored by the latest strides being made in genetic research, but combining to show that the prehistory of America is far richer in its human background than previously suspected. So that's the end of Chapter 36. We'll pick up with Chapter 37 next time. Anasazi chocolate. Oh. Tonight, Chapter 37 for you here. Anasazi chocolate. Chaco Canyon's fabulous achievements in colossal architecture, urban planning, and astronomy are world famous. Lost in the shadows of its monumentality, however, its residue of a humble pleasure incidentally points to thousand-year-old connections far beyond the American Southwest. The earliest known use of chocolate in North America above the Rio Grande River has been found amid the ruins of Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Dated between 1000 and 1125 AD, residue of theobromine, a chocolate trace element, was removed from ceramic pieces of broken cylinder jars used by the Anasazi at their foremost ceremonial structure. Known as Pueblo Bonito, the beautiful town is a colossal 5-story D-shaped building housing some 500 rooms and chambers, mostly for arcane ritual purposes. Now, I'm going to stop right there before I go any further in this, because it ain't no mystery to me, Bubba. This might be a mystery to some, ancient history researcher. Why is there chocolate in there? And ancient, it just happens they happen to be at ritual sites, right? Well, I don't even have to read any further. I can explain this to you right away. It's just like it's no secret that these South American shaman, talked about this before. I mean, we're led to believe that these South American shaman just, as a result of trial and error, through the million different types of roots and barks from different types of trees. I mean, you can imagine in a jungle environment, ladies and gentlemen, that there's going to be millions of flora and fauna, millions of types of plants and herbs and trees and tree barks and roots and everything else. And being able to find the specific ones that you mix together to make DMT alkaloids, very similar to the dimethyltryptamine DMT alkaloids found in and secreted by your pineal gland, which is where it produces the DMT at. Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah, well, in case you didn't know, this to me is what makes the drug laws and all that stuff completely just ridiculous. Each and every single human being on this planet, and most all the animals and most all the plants, almost everything on this earth has DMT in it. All of us are carrying the world's most powerful hallucinogenic substance on us at all times. We are all holding, all of us. Whether you're into drugs or not, you're holding. You're holding all the time. And so we're led to believe that these South American shamans just accidentally stumbled upon the ability to be able to mix these different barks and roots together to get these specific alkaloids to create a synthesized version of dimethyltryptamine, which they use in spiritual practices. And you can go to the South America and visit the ayahuasca shaman to this day. And so there's no question when you look at the ancient visitors, these giant bearded gods that visited South America and did all this building and brought culture to the people there. There's no question that this was one of the things brought to them, the device for communicating with the divine and communicating in the spirit world with the gods. So finding chocolate in Chaco Canyon, maybe that's why they call it Chaco Canyon. You ever think of that? Chocolate Canyon. That just, I don't know why. When I said the words Chocolate Canyon, all I saw was a fucking, what's his name? Martin Lawrence dressed as Big Mama floating on a river of chocolate down the Sahara or something. I don't know why. That just a fucking terrible image. You got to excuse me, folks. I had a fucking all-night dream last night that I was getting chased around and attempted to be murdered by Tom Cruise for exposing Scientology too much. It was fucking nuts, man. I woke up, went back to sleep, and the dream continued. And it was so fucking uber real. He was just a sick, sadistic bastard. I mean, I know he's a buttfucker, but goddamn. So anyway, my point here is the reason why you find chocolate in vases, be it from the Anasazi Indians, in Chaco Canyon or wherever it may be, the reason you find the chocolate there is because of this. Chocolate is an MAOI inhibitor. And there are many psychedelic plants, psychedelic substances, such as peyote and such as mescaline, which is derived from a San Pedro cactus. You can actually synthesize San Pedro cactus and extract mescaline from it and have, and fucking trip your balls off. I mean, absolutely. I did some mescaline one time, and it was fucking amazing. Amazing. You will talk to the gods if you take mescaline. That's just all there is to it. But because of the structure of mescaline, if you just eat a bunch of it, you're not going to trip. You're not going to get high. It has to be combined with an MAO inhibitor. Well, it just so happens that chocolate is a perfect MAO inhibitor. That's why oftentimes when mescaline is sold on the street, they call it chocolate meskies or chocolate mescaline. That's why. You ever wondered that? Druggies out there, you ever wonder why every time you get your mescaline, it comes in chocolate? Or sometimes you get mushrooms, bars that are in chocolate. You ever wonder why that is? That's why. Because the chocolate acts as an MAO inhibitor, which allows the alkaloids of the hallucinogen to be much more pronounced and to affect you way more than it would otherwise. So the fact that these chocolate residue was found in these ancient, I mean, right here it says ritual sites, religious sites, well, that's why. But the real question is who gave these primitive people in areas where, there ain't fucking coca plants growing in the goddamn desert in the Rio Grande, near Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. There's not coca plants growing around it. So that had to have been brought in and introduced to these people. And considering that these same suspects have been seen around Peru and were responsible for giving people access to all the different type of drugs, I mean, like I've talked about before, the cocaine mummies. They found all these giant mummies, red-haired mummies, Caucasian mummies, buried with pounds of cocaine. Some in China, red-haired mummies, shaman buried in China with pounds of marijuana on them. That's a reason. Because these things were associated with these medicine men and these shamans, that's why they were the shaman and the medicine men. And because they were associated with them, and because this was the first time that the people had access to these things when they came in contact with these people, they felt inclined to bury them with these objects because they had not had them prior to coming in contact with these people. The Anasazi Navajo, for ancient enemy, were a red-haired race of civilizers who built an immense network of roads and astronomically oriented monuments in the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, beginning around the turn of the 11th century until they were overthrown by native tribal people less than 200 years later, finishing up as the renowned Cliff Dwellers circa 1350 A.D. The discovery of chocolate at Pueblo Bonito proves that the Anasazi engaged in long-distance trade with Central America because the nearest cacao plantation, was more than 1,100 miles away. Well, that doesn't mean they engage in long-distance trading. That's what they always, they must have been trading then, long-distance. Yeah, right. You know how fucking far that is? There's no evidence that anybody in New Mexico was trading with people in South America, any other place. No, this was introduced to them by these nomadic people, the nomadic Amorites, who were all over the world spreading culture and setting up culture after the fall of Atlantis. A recent investigation found that the Anasazi themselves were not natives of the American Southwest, but originally a people remembered as the Huari from Pacific coastal Peru, where they built a prosperous pre-Inca civilization. The Huari were forced by their enemies to immigrate around 1000 A.D., coincidental with the sudden rise of the Anasazi in New Mexico. The Huari and Anasazi shared enough diagnostic culture traits to reveal their common identity. Chocolate was a luxury drink enjoyed exclusively by the upper classes, used in rituals and invented by the Olmecs, America's first civilizers on the Atlantic coast of Mexico 3,000 years ago. It was possible that sometimes it was mixed with hot peppers or possibly honey. Cacao beans were so valuable that they were used by the Maya as legitimate currency. Archaeologist Patricia L. Crown from the University of New Mexico discovered theobromine on the Anasazi ceramic fragments. Her research was published in the January 27, 2008 issue of Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Well, that's the end of Chapter 37. We're moving on to Chapter 38 now. Genocide in Ancient Kentucky. Most modern Midwesterners do not realize that their peaceful forming country was long ago soaked with the blood of the very people who introduced agriculture into North America. In May 1773, a representative of Lord Dunmore, the governor of colonial Virginia, visited the Native American town of Chillicothe on the Little Miami River in what would later become the southwest corner of the state of Ohio. Thomas Bullitt was seeking permission from the Shawnee for his fellow Virginians to settle throughout Kentucky. In his recreation of this meeting, Alan W. Eckert, known to closely base his novels on actual oral and written histories, relates how Chief Blackfish told Bullitt that the land was not the Indians to give away because it did not belong to them. The Shawnees cannot tell you that you are allowed to settle in the Kentucky lands. We have never owned that land. It belongs to the murdered ghosts of the murdered Asgens, a white people from the Eastern Sea. A white people from the Eastern Sea. I wonder who that could be. Here we go. Their bones and their ghosts own and occupy every hill and valley of the country. Long ago, our fathers and our grandfathers killed off the Asgens, but we now fear the spirits of these people more than our fathers and grandfathers feared them when they were flesh. Chief Blackfish's expression, their fathers and grandfathers, implies a long period. How long? Was it several hundred years, 500, or 1,000? Celtic seafarers could have arrived in North America around 500 A.D., or the Norse appeared circa 1000 A.D., but definitive association with either people of the Asgens is lacking. The surviving evidence of some 70 pit iron furnaces nevertheless attests to the presence here of pre-modern Western Europeans. Iron making is an economic activity based on demand for goods and services by consumers, an existence of the means of production, and the creation of a workforce to respond to that demand. Before white settlers arrived around 1800, the economic conditions for iron manufacture simply did not exist in the Middle West, but it existed in Michigan, where these Hopewell mound builders got their culture from. And that was these Amorites, again, who fled from the Middle East after the exodus of the Jews into Palestine. They fled to their copper mines where they had been mining copper in the West. And lo and behold, we see their archaeological remains here in the United States, and it's been well covered up. Yet the story of the Asgians may reveal a forgotten people that furnish the economic conditions suitable for the production of iron from the extensive bog ore deposits in the rolling terrain of glaciated south central Ohio. These natural conditions end abruptly just north of Chillicothe, where the Scioto River Valley begins winding through the hills of the southern part of the state. The prehistoric Asgians would not find ore deposits in northern Kentucky, and especially not among the rugged hills across the Ohio River south of the mouth of the Scioto. Iron tools and weapons produced by Asgian work parties in south central Ohio could have reached their homeland in Kentucky by boat via the Scioto and Ohio rivers. With Iron Age and steel-edged weaponry, the minority Asgians defended themselves until superior technology succumbed to overwhelming numbers of native enemies, the final attack by Blackfish's fathers and grandfathers. Chapter 39, A Giant Hand in Michigan by J. Stuart Wakefield, and A Worldwide Race of Prehistoric Giants by Patrick C. Chouinard. I guess it's a combined article here. Oh, I wanted to mention, last night I talked about this film that I've been looking for the longest time. I finally found Nothing Lasts Forever, made in 1984. That's up on my YouTube channel now. I highly suggest you go watch that. It's a Masonic mindfuck, man. I mean, it's funny how right at 33 minutes is when the Masonic guy comes in and knocks on the guy's door. And watching a little more of it tonight, it just became very clear that that because I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene in there where the Grand Master is showing, oh, here's all our past masters, and it's all these pictures, of famous Freemasons that were famous people, that you recognize it, but, those are real people. And he says, Walt Whitman was just here. Walt Whitman's a fantastic guy. And, of course, Walt Whitman was a Freemason. That's admitted. So I think it was the fact that they actually put real stuff in there, combined with, stuff like, well, you've all heard of the Masonic chipping program, right? I'm sure everybody in the conspiracy world's, heard of that by now. It's been several years that's been out. And you can go and look that up. It's not a conspiracy theory. They really have in Boston and other all kinds of states all over the place. The Freemasons actually hold these programs where you can, take your kid down like you're taking your fucking dog down to get his shots, from the local VFW or something, Literally, bring your kids on down to the Freemason Lodge this Saturday, so we can fingerprint and chip them so you'll never lose them in case they're kidnapped. No. They want to chip them and fingerprint them in case they find out that their DNA is something that they can use and are interested in, and they'll know right where to go get their kidnapped victim. But in this movie, the main character, the guy who was the main character in Gremlins, this old lady is telling him, on the moon, that their families, when they go to the moon to go shopping on this bus flown by Bill Murray, or not flown by him, but I guess he's the director or whatever, that their family believes they've gone to Miami the whole time. And so she actually says in there that they put a chip in their brain so that every time they say the word moon, the word Miami comes out. And how their families think they're crazy because they're always talking about the craters on Miami. And I just went, my God, that's 1984 when that came out. Fitting that it's 1984, but, the Masonic chipping thing was not happening back then. 30 years ahead of its time, 28 years. Unbelievable stuff. But it's up there on my YouTube channel now. Nothing lasts forever. You can go there and watch the whole film. I highly suggest you do it. Early 19th century treasure hunters often dug into so-called Indian mounds of the American Middle West hoping to find gold or precious jewels. Instead, they sometimes broke into ancient burials containing the skeletons of giants. For nearly 200 years, scientists explained that these oversized human remains only appeared as such because bones proportionately disarticulate in the soil over time. Right. Beginning in the 1960s, however, improved excavation techniques and forensic procedures determined that the mound's skeletal evidence did, in fact, belong to individuals of extraordinary stature. Even mainstream archaeologists come to admit that first millennia BC Americans, academically referred to as the Adena, were at least occasionally given to physical height far above the modern average. Men stood about 7 feet tall. Their women around 6 feet 8 inches. The tallest professionally measured Adena male reached 7 feet 2 inches, although unofficial sources report other specimens as high as 8 feet. That's because, as I've told you many times, the DNA evidence and clips that I have pertaining to this DNA evidence, which will be in my film, prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that these nomadic Amorites that came from the ancient Middle East were responsible for the tribal structure that was set up with the natives, because that same tribal structure was carried over from the Middle East from the ancient tribes of Israel. None of this came as a surprise to Native American record keepers who have long told of the Rana Nang Wedowanka, or the fair-skinned giant sorcerers. Now, that's interesting because I also have a piece of information which proves that these Rata-Rata-Watonkas were also related to the Vikings. Fair-skinned giant sorcerers. Now, that's interesting because there's also further proof of that. They had the sorcerers, because they had this ancient Kabbalistic knowledge. It went back to the Middle East. J. Stewart, blah, blah, blah. The cover of Ancient American's December 2009 issue features an image on a Michigan rock outcropping I found on September 29, 2008. The petroglyph is located 6 feet above what might have been a beach in Copper Harbor when Lake Superior was higher, probably when ancient miners were working the area for copper between 2400 BC and 1200 BC. And our friend Michael in Michigan said he's on this. He's looking into this. He's going to see if he can find out what's up with this, which is pretty awesome. He lives up there. So if you live in Michigan, I tell you what, you are really, really cheating yourself if you're not going out and checking out all this. I mean, if you live in pretty much any state, but I mean, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, I mean, there's stuff all over the place. I took the photo myself with my own hand on it. I'm 6 feet tall. My hand is 7.5 inches long. My middle finger is 3.5 inches long. So I calculate that the glyph has fingers extending nearly 2 inches beyond mine. The depth of the carving and its detail needs study, but it may be evidence for individuals of extraordinary stature among the crews of seafaring miners who excavated 500 million pounds of copper ore from the Upper Peninsula during prehistory. In Rocks and Rows, to illustrate connections between their monuments inscribed with navigation directions to American and European so-called bellbreaker pottery people, I wrote, quote, "For a long time it was confidently believed that there was physically a separate group of people who made and used bellbreaker pottery and the metal artifacts found with it. Earlier work suggested that the men in particular were more robust than usual and that their skulls were larger and rounder. The 1980 text goes on to predict that computer development should enable better data recovery and analysis on this issue. Innumerable giant skeletons have been found in mounds throughout the Midwest, as documented in many original sources and summarized in others. Kimball tells of a Tuscarora legend of the annihilation of giants around 1000 BC. More than 7 pages of Childress's book are devoted to description of the 57 red-haired giant 7-foot mummies found in Nevada's Lovelock Cave in Nevada by University of California archaeologist Llewellyn Loud during 1924. Giants and their skeletons have been found all over North and South America. How may the very real existence of these giants be understood? An explanation may lie in the nutrition and diet of megalithic people living along the coasts of Europe. Oh, please. They had a big diet, so that's why they grew that big. You're not going to try to sell us that line, are you? So that's the problem. That's why I've got to do stuff like I'm doing with this movie and this project and the multiple series of films on this, because there's so much of this. In fact, that's what most of this research, you get people who will be into researching the rock wall or into researching any of these ancient anomalies, and they're great up to a certain point, but when they get to a certain point, then they just veer right back off into the normal mainstream way of thinking. And you can't attempt to even understand this stuff if you allow your mind to keep going back into the established scientific facts. Because it's all been bullshit, and it's all been designed to hide these facts that are found in ancient archaeology. Until then, the oceans had never been fished on a large scale, nor yet loaded with chemicals and plastic debris. Salmon run in the rivers of Europe. Farming was expanding, but the people were probably not yet mineral depleted. 2,000 years later, Vikings moved to Greenland with its enormous marine resources. According to Dr. Graham Davis, a specialist in the medieval world and its language, Viking Greenland was a prosperous nation for 5 centuries. Greenland to the Vikings was as California to the pioneers. Skeletal remains of early Viking settlers in Greenland show them growing around 2 inches taller than their ethnically identical contemporaries in Norway, while there is much evidence of robust health and longevity. In 400 BC, the Greek poet Homer wrote, "On the earth there were once giants." In old Irish mythology, we learn of the Formarach, a giant sea people. Their leader, Balor, was said to have guided them to the shores of Ireland following the Great Flood. They then became the native inhabitants of the island, while some scholars positioned the Formarach point of origin in Spain or North Africa. Still, others proclaim the original homeland of these pre-Celtic giants was Atlantis, some 200 miles west of Gibraltar. More tales of giants were told by the Norse and other Germanic peoples of northwestern Europe. According to the Eddas, the ancient Norse scriptures, there were once 2 races of giants. The children of Thrud descended from the frost giant, Ymir, and the children of Bor, who were the Aesir, the gods of Valhalla. Though tremendous in size, the Aesir were distinctly Nordic in appearance. For reasons unknown, they battled with giants in endless combat. Well, that's because you had one race of giants that were of one bloodline descent and one of the other. You had some that were Mardukites, some that were Enlilites. They were all split up and divided between each other after the different Anunnaki were given dominion over various parts of the world. Sumerian texts talk all about that. Finally, Odin, Vili, and Ve, the first Aesir, ambushed Ymir and killed him. When they slit his throat, a great deluge rushed forth to drown most of the giants. Some escaped in a boat to a new realm later known as Jotunheim, home of the giants. The world as we know it, Midgard, was formed from the body of Ymir. His salty, watery blood became the oceans, rivers, and lakes. His flesh formed the earth, his bones the rocks and mountains, his hair the forests. Maggots from inside his stomach evolved into dwarfs. According to Genesis, there were giants in those days, And also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same mighty men who were of old, men of renown. In the 5th book of the Pentateuch, the biblical narrative speaks of a giant sarcophagus. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. 9 cubits was the length of it, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. The Hebrew amma, or amot, commonly translated as cubit, is generally, if not universally accepted, at 17 inches. As such, Og's iron bed would have been 12.9 feet long and 5.8 feet wide. The Old Testament also describes one of the most famous giant encounters ever. And there went out a champion from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, whose height of 8.6 feet was 6 cubits in a span of 9 inches, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels, which is more than 150 pounds, of brass, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels, about 20 pounds of iron. Greek myth was also populated by giants in their most common form. They were known as gigantes. Eons ago, they attempted to overthrow Zeus and the other gods of Mount Olympus, but ultimately failed. They were grotesque creatures, huge humanoids with snake-like legs. A Greek saga, the Agronautica, described the giants in the following manner. Their bodies have 3 pairs of nerved hands like paws. The first pair hangs from their gnarled shoulders. The second and third pairs nestle up against their misbegotten hips. The 7th century BC mythographer Hesiod stated that the Titan Kronos, wielding a sickle, severed the genitals of his father Uranus, allowing drops of fresh blood to trickle down to other Earth Mother Gaia, who became impregnated and thereafter gave birth to Erinyes, the great giants, shining in their armor and holding long spears in their hands. Hesiod describes them as great, but they are often not huge at all, instead in possession of unusual strength and hubristic aggression. The Gigantomachy is a giant's primary myth and relates to a war with their main opponents, the Olympian gods. This was perhaps the most widely depicted struggle in Greek art and literary traditions. The giants bombarded the gods with boulders and the flaming trunks of burning trees. An oracle foretold how the gods themselves would be unable to finish off the giants, but if aided by a powerful mortal, the task could be completed. That hero was Hercules. It is important to understand that the gigantes were not only large beings in Greek mythology. The gods themselves were giants. Unlike the gigantes, they were blonde-haired, fair-skinned, and highly Nordic in appearance. Their description is consistent with worldwide traditions of ancient Caucasians, some depicted as giants, others of normal stature, that long ago prevailed in areas long deemed to have been the sole domain of non-European people. Non-Western giants appear throughout Indo-European mythology. The Sanskrit Daitya water giants cited in the Vishnu Purana of the Mahabharata, the most ancient and highly revered Hindu sacred text. The Daitya were equivalent to the Titans in Greek mythology, including Atlas and the other kings of Atlantis. Some of the earliest surviving written and oral accounts tell of fierce, light-skinned peoples who were once the central force of a lost civilization. Science writer Terence Aim described a series of events in 2 unpublished articles dealing with the presence of giants in ancient America. He also wrote of several encounters between European explorers and various giant-sized Caucasian aborigines in Central and South America. The Paiute tribe of present-day Nevada tell of an ancient war they waged against a primordial race of white, red-haired giants. These Indians called these imposing Caucasians the Sitaka, a name referencing Thule. a fibrous plant that giants used to construct assault rafts. According to tribal lore, this race was already living in North America when the ancestors of the Paiute arrived 15,000 years ago. Although today's scientific dogmatism dismisses such traditions as sheer fantasy, Ames states that such perennial accounts cannot be so easily discarded. The physical remains of giant-sized Caucasian peoples have been found on almost every continent across North America. Dozens of sites yielding oversized human bones were excavated, including those in Virginia, New York State, Michigan, Illinois, Tennessee, and Arizona. Hard scientific evidence supporting the Paiute folk memory of a war with giant red-haired Caucasians first came to light in 1924 at Nevada's Lovelock Cave. Some 10,000 years ago, a massive freshwater body called Lake Lahontan covered the region. It was beneath this vast body of water that the original cavern was positioned and remained submerged until the lake eventually dried up. According to Paiute accounts, the giants practiced cannibalism, as did early Neanderthals, whose campsite remains include human bones marred with butcher marks. In the Paiute version, the giants stood 12 feet tall, perhaps exaggeration of a naturally tall Caucasoid race. In any case, the Indians' ancestors pursued the giants into a cave where the giants took sanctuary and continued to resist their enemies. The cave entrance was stuffed with dry bush, then ignited to smoke out the giants. Those who emerged were immediately overwhelmed and slaughtered, while any remaining inside died of smoke asphyxiation. Tribal legend became archaeological fact in 1911 when outsized human remains were found in Lovelock Cave. They, of course, disappeared, never to be found again. These included two mummies. One, a 6.5 foot tall female. The other, male, supposedly more than 8 feet tall. Both were red-haired. Scattered haphazardly around them was a profusion of arrowheads and a testimony to the massacre mentioned by the Paiutes. A 16th century Mestizo chronicler, Fernando de Avila Ixachotl, wrote, "In this land called New Spain there were giants, as demonstrated by their bones that have been discovered in many areas." The ancient Toltec record keepers referred to the giants as Quinametsin, and as they had a record of the history of the Quinametsin, they learned that they had many wars and dimensions among themselves in this land that is now called New Spain. Dissensions, not dimensions. They learned that they had many wars and dissensions among themselves in this land that is now called New Spain. They were destroyed and their civilization came to an end as a result of great calamities and as a punishment from the heavens for grave sins that they had committed. Western European explorers such as Magellan, Sir Francis Drake, De Soto, and Commodore Byron, the famous poet, Lord Byron's grandfather, all submitted reports of having personally encountered living giants in North America. A well-documented sighting by Magellan occurred in 1520 near the harbor of San Julian, Mexico, where he and his crew confronted a red-haired giant, allegedly standing nearly 10 feet tall with a voice like a bull. Later, Magellan learned from natives that the giant belonged to a neighboring tribe. Remarkably, Magellan's logs claim that he and his mates captured two of these living giants and brought them aboard ship for transportation to Europe. Neither survived the voyage, however, and both were buried at sea. Numerous earthworks associated with red-haired giants dotted the Middle West from as far south as Tennessee and north into Wisconsin. Most were obliterated by early 19th century farmers, according to author Frank Joseph in Advanced Civilizations of Prehistoric America. The mound builders stood out like aliens in the midst of tribal America's far more multitudinous native population. It seems clear then that an actual race of red-haired giants dominated our continent during prehistory, perhaps thousands of years before the ancestors of today's Native Americans arrived over the Bering Straits. That's absolutely the case. That's absolutely what my research has shown, exactly what I'm going to be showing you in this film. beyond any question. These people were here and had civilizations here for long before what we know was the Native Americans had. And yes, they interbred with them, but there was also wars and they were wiped out. So that's good stuff there, and good to see that other people are on to what I'm on to as well already. Let's continue on here. Got another short chapter I want to get through here tonight. Chapter 40. Native Americans from Europe and the Near East. Curious cultural comparisons between Native American tribal peoples and Western European have been noticed and commented upon since pre-colonial times. But only with the advent of modern advances in genetic testing and DNA research have those suspicions parallels been provided the kind of scientific support necessary to confirm their validity. And I think this is going to be getting into a lot of stuff I'm going to be showing footage of in the film as well. Whether a primeval migration came from the west or the east has yet to be determined concerning the DNA X markers found primarily in the native populations of North America. Recently, however, anthropologists and archaeologists have been considering the possibility of an east or Atlantic migration from some remote age. Algonquin native tradition speaks of just such a mass movement from the direction of the rising sun, not from the west. Critics of an eastward migration are quick to dismiss a crossing either by boat or ice sheet. Rapon S. Molly and David G. Smith from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and the University of Davis, California, argue that DNA evidence to support the factual foundation of Algonquin oral history for a migration of Eastern people. The wide geographic and linguistic distribution of haplogroup X in modern native North American groups and the predominance among these of a characteristic mutation in HVSI of the control region not found in European or Asian members of haplogroup X implies that it is a founding Native American lineage. In addition, the presence of 3 full-blood Algonquin-speaking Native Americans who exhibit both the haplogroup X with their transition of the rare album marker, Albumum nepotski, also only found in North America due to recent European admixture. The most convincing evidence that haplogroup X is not the result of Viking or even more recent European admixture would be its presence in ancient Native Americans, and it indeed is there. And guess where it's in the highest concentration of? Give you one guess. Michigan. Indeed, the Hopewell Indians, the Hopewell mound builders, who learned the mound building from these redhead giants and interbred with them. The new data from a genetic marker appropriately called Lineage X suggests a definite, if ancient, link between Eurasians and Native Americans, says Theodore Shar, a molecular anthropologist from Emory University in Atlanta, who presented his findings in March 2007 at the annual meeting of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists in Salt Lake City, Utah. Shar continues, researchers had already identified 4 common genetic variants called haplogroups A, B, C, and D in the mitochondrial DNA of living Native Americans. Haplogroup X was different. It was spotted by Taroni in a small number of European populations. We fully expected to find it in Asia or Northeast Asia. To their surprise, however, haplogroup X was only confirmed in the genes of a smattering of living people in Europe and Asia Minor, including Italians, Finns, and certain Israelis. The only time you pick it up is when you move west into Eurasia. Clearly, the roots of Native Americans are not found exclusively in Siberia. The presence of population groups from Europe and the Near East at the dawn of our continent's human occupation are beyond question. So that's the end of Chapter 40. Chapter 41 will be our next chapter. Odysseus sailed to America. Chapter 41, Odysseus sailed to America. Although the Odyssey, along with Homer's Iliad, was retold throughout all the centuries of classical Greece, neither epic belonged to that period. Instead, both were rooted in the late Bronze Age that ended abruptly around 1200 BC, followed by a 400-year Dark Age until the Athenian awakening of the 9th century BC. Accordingly, the author looks for pre-classical motives that prompted Odysseus to undertake his long sea voyage, and in the process, find them in ancient America. Oh, let me guess. So the Odyssey and Odysseus and all that, let me guess. That's the same Amorite guys coming over here? When their copper mines, all that was derived? I should have fucking known. Wasn't one guy short and one guy tall like a giant in that? Oh, man. Copper mining in the Keweenaw Peninsula of Lake Superior has been dated by radiocarbon to nominally 5,000 years. Naturally formed ingots of this red metal were available in those days by surface mining and were loaded aboard vessels for transport eastward. The rich copper ore was of secondary importance as long as the large metal nuggets were available. Smelting of the copper ore with charcoal was not a complicated technology, and the required temperature was somewhat less than that needed for the smelting of iron ore into pig iron. The molten copper was cast into ingots of standardized size and weight. The weight was nominally a talent, around 60 to 90 pounds, and the shape was in the form of a fat X that permitted 4 positions of handholds when moving the cast ingot manually. Given its reddish color matching a sunset and the nominally oxide-shaped copper became poetically referred to as the cattle of the sun. The ingots could be resmelted for alloying and casting into utilitarian shapes, but the bulk weight of the metal remained seemingly indestructible. From the early Bronze Age on, a single ship could return from its voyage carrying home a treasure's worth of trade goods and sailing maps that were equivalent to covert information belonging to the local city-state. These prehistoric copper mining and seafaring connections between Michigan's Upper Peninsula and the ancient Old World through daring seafarers seem to be suggested by subtle references found in one of the greatest epics of Western literature. The Odyssey, by the venerable blind poet, is filled with religious symbolism, not geographical knowledge. Even so, Homer's energetic hero starts out with a small fleet, leading it into new waters against terrible hazards, only to be mostly destroyed by unfriendly natives. One vessel survives, the flagship under his personal command, which sails on because there was no treasure to bring home. The storyline is convoluted, but Odysseus plays the geographical cards close to his chest. His far-flung journey passes between the six-headed Scylla monster and the sun god's cattle. Homer tells us that there were 7 herds of cattle with 50 heads each and 7 flocks of sheep with a similar 50 heads each. A remarkably detailed example of record-keeping for a piece of fiction. Odysseus was forewarned to leave the sun god's cattle alone and get off of the island as soon as possible for a safe journey. The flagship would typically load up with fresh food and water, then continue on its journey. Along came a storm, and Odysseus and crew were stranded on a mysterious island. Rough weather lasted for a month, suggesting that the sailing season was over. Food provision on the flagship ran low, and when Odysseus was away, hunting up a meal, his men started butchering the sun god's cattle for supper. Odysseus was unhappy with the way the situation had gotten out of control, but the damage had been done. At a break in the storms, they shoved away from the island, but soon their ship was destroyed by a bolt of lightning sent by an angry sun god. The classical Greeks referred to particularly prosperous islands as Thrinacia, implying a triangular shape. They were usually associated with profitable commercial routes, and the details of their locations was not specific knowledge, or not public knowledge, rather, during ancient times, but valuable trade secrets. Several triangular-shaped islands, including Sicily and Britain, but they possessed no copper to be mined and exported. On the other hand, Newfoundland off eastern Canada has a roughly triangular shape, distorted by bays and secondary peninsulas. Well, I know exactly where they're talking about. because I was talking to Michael in the chat room last night, or earlier today as well, or last night too, but posting these pictures. He said his mom lives near there. There's a place right there on that peninsula in Michigan, right in the area where these guys ran, and it's called Pyramid Point. Go to Google real quick, type in Pyramid Point, Michigan, and then go to Google Images, hit Images, and go check this out while I'm reading this. You should go look at this right now. I promise you it's worth it. Do it right now as you're listening. Pyramid Point, Michigan. Go to Images, hit that, and look at it. That fits the description that they said right here. Folks, it's a triangular shape. It's like a giant pyramid mound. And it's right in the area where all this copper mining was going on. That's unbelievable. So they called it Thrinacia. So that area there where Pyramid Point is must have been some ancient civilization. My goodness. It nevertheless is a large island situated on the ancient copper route. The St. Lawrence River passes eastward into the Gulf Stream, following eastward by nearby Nova Scotia to the distant lands of Western Europe. In terms of regional geography, Newfoundland Island is large enough to be between 47 and 52 degrees north latitude. So nominally at 50 degrees north latitude. Helena Blavatsky said if you want to find Atlantis, you have to go look on the 42nd degree parallel or something like that. And that's almost that, I mean, that's like dead on in Michigan. In terms of regional geography, Newfoundland Island is large enough to be between 47 and 52 degrees north latitude, so nominally at 50 degrees north latitude. A single degree of latitude corresponds to about 60 miles of distance, or roughly the maximum distance seen on a clear day by a keen-eyed lookout atop a ship's mast. Coincidentally, cattle herd numbers given in the Odyssey tell us that the Sun God's Island is nominally at 50 degrees north latitude and large enough to be spread out over nearly 7 degrees of latitude when sailing approaches are considered. Another factor in the location is Homer's longitude, which corresponds to the 7 flocks of sheep at 50 heads each. The longitude degree as an east-west distance is smaller than the latitude degree of about 60 miles and becomes smaller as one moves further north from the equator. The east-west spread of Newfoundland Island is nominally 52 to 59 degrees west longitude, accounting for the 7 flocks. Modern longitude is measured from the Greenwich Observatory near London in England, but during ancient times its reference was the city of Alexandria in far-off Egypt, some 30 degrees further east. The Pillars of Hercules are nominally 5 degrees westward of London, and so Newfoundland is about 50 degrees westward of the Pillars as a natural reference site for sailing into the Atlantic Ocean. Accordingly, Odysseus was a mythical personification of classical and even pre-classical Greek seafarers who regularly sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to North America for the high-grade copper that made them rich, because Homer's epic is rooted in the late Bronze Age. So that's the end of chapter 41 there. We're going to continue on with chapter 42. Earliest Americans and Mayas, older than imagined. Official insistence that men first crossed some hypothetical land bridge at Alaska's Bering Straits into North America 12,000 years ago has been dealt yet another serious blow by recent discoveries. Petroglyphs depicting animals, humans, and even what appear to be buildings at the Pedra Furada rock shelter in Brazil's Sierra de Campivara National Park yielded charcoal from a campfire dated 56,000 years ago. Dr. Gasaria dos Santos and his colleagues at Australia's National University used an acid-base wet oxidation technique that chemically scours a fine layer from its charcoal surface, which allows investigators to go beyond the 40,000-year barrier limited to standard carbon-14 testing. 5 of the 7 charcoal samples removed by Dos Santos and Dr. Michael Bird from the Pedra Furada site yielded dates in excess of 56,000 years. 2 additional samples yielded dates to 53,000 and 55,000 years ago. These dates are good and reliable, said Dr. Bird, who developed the new technique, and there's no reason to doubt them. The Brazilian find was not the first correctly dated by his ABOX methodology. It was used successfully 2 years earlier at archaeological locations in South Africa and Western Australia, where an Aboriginal site known as the Devil's Lair was credibly backdated to 50,000 years before the present. Sierra de Campavera National Park, and particularly its Pedra Furada area, is rich in sandstone rock shelters, many of them filled with tools, weapons, human remains, evidence of hearth fires, and cave art tens of thousands of years old. They demonstrate that man was already settled in South America more than 40,000 years before mainstream scholars claim that the so-called Clovis people first arrived from Siberia. Complementary finds there likewise undermine a 12,000-year date for the first Americans. In January 2009, a human settlement at eastern Siberia's Yanu River was carbon dated to twice the age of the oldest previously known site in the region. Excavated by archaeologists from Russia's Institute for the History of Material Culture in St. Petersburg, the director Vladimir Putulko reported that their analysis of man-made hearth fires showed that lands north of the Arctic Circle were occupied about 30,000 years ago. There was nothing to prevent these early pioneers from migrating into North America at this time. Putulko and his colleagues made their discoveries while following up on the work of geologist Mikhail Datserzan, who found a 30,000-year-old rhino horn foreshaft tied to a spear near the Yanu River in 1993. A foreshaft is the detachable piece between the main part of a spear and its point. This rhino-borne foreshaft, together with a pair of smaller versions made from mammoth ivory, are virtually identical to weapons used by the Clovis people who spread across North America supposedly just 12,000 years ago. Putulko led his team to the same area where they uncovered 383 stone artifacts, such as flake stone tools including mammoth, reindeer, bison, and woolly rhinoceros bones. The occurrence of these skeletal remains demonstrates that eastern Siberia enjoyed a temperate lapse during the last ice age, when open meadows attracted these large animals, which were themselves pursued by early hunters. Apparently, the preferred meat was reindeer, judging from the majority of bones collected at the site. Well, it doesn't mean that was what was preferred. It just probably means that's what was most abundant. Hello? Though the Yanu River finds show the Clovis people began entering North America long before conventional archaeologists believe, they were but one of several ways of immigration that arrived on our continent, some long before, as indicated by the 56,000-year-old Pedra Furada rock art as far south as Brazil. If their creators took the Bering Strait route, they could have begun their trek into America more than 60,000 years ago. So again, saying that the rock wall is 50,000 plus years old is not that much of a stretch. I'd say at minimum it's 50,000 years old, if not earlier. Although not nearly as old, both the age and scope of the Maya civilization were expanded by the discovery in May 2003 of a center of mass production of ceremonial columns near the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua. These production were going on over 2,700 years ago. Archaeologists held that the Maya spread as far as south as Honduras beginning around 200 BC. But the El Cascal de Flor de Pino site shows that Maya culture was already flourishing 500 years earlier and beyond its accepted geographical perimeters. Dr. Armengol Gassino, who headed up the excavation for Spain's Barcelona University, reported that his team recovered monuments, petroglyphs, pottery, and numerous pillars of prodigious size. These columns resemble those found at Mexican sites where they had ritual uses. He said, adding that the El Cascal de Flor de Pino shows the Maya influenced a much larger geographical area than supposed until now. The Nicaraguan pillars resemble those used in the construction of important sacred buildings at Tikal in Guatemala, Mexico's Palenque, and Copan in Honduras. Jeremy Sabaloff, Williams director of the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, commented on the Nicaraguan site. This discovery greatly extends the range of these pre-classical civilizations. Such recent finds from the Arctic Circle to Brazil are confirming what writers for Ancient American have been arguing for the last 11 years, namely that man's antiquity in America goes back much further than students are still taught in school by mainstream academics. So that's the end of Chapter 42. Moving on to Chapter 43 here without further ado. Celts in pre-Columbian Ohio. And oftentimes, these Amorites who I've talked much about are often lumped in and also called Celts. They're also called Vikings. They're called Aryans because they had a hand in the creation of all these cultures. So the mainstream of science has gone under this opinion that these were all different cultures and different elements of different cultures, but in fact, they're one and the same. But it's no doubt that these guys, the Amorites, were in Ohio because they were responsible for building the Serpent Mound and many other sites that go over many, many, many states. The Celts were great travelers. Beginning more than 3,000 years ago, they wandered down to their homelands in the steppes of central Russia across the entire European continent to the ends of Portugal and Ireland. They did not lack the will or the means, capacious, seaworthy ships to follow their restless instincts even further westward. Did ancient Britons cross the sea more than 3,000 years ago to become our country's mysterious mound builders? More specifically, were cultural traits of the so-called Bellbreaker people of Western Europe shared in common with North America's Adena culture? And the Adena were said to be of great stature. The women were 6'7", sometimes 7 foot tall. The Adena were very tall, large people. The former is an archaeological name for a people better remembered as the Celts, while the latter, likewise a scientific term, applies to our continent's first agriculturists, referred to by some native tribal peoples of the Ohio Valley as the Allegwe or the Allegheny. The contemporaneous emergence of these two peoples precipitated a change from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age in Britain and the Copper Age in North America. So, too, woven textiles made their first appearance along the wide use of earthenware. Houses built by both cultures were round and in some instances identically rested atop subsequent burial sites. Physical characteristics shared by either folk comprised exceptionally tall stature and brachycephalicism for human skulls wider than they are long. Their rounded skulls featured a prominent brow ridge and a larger jaw. In writing of early migrations to the British Isles, historian M.C. Burkitt observed, the invaders differed somewhat from the former inhabitants of the island. The Neolithic folk seem to have been of moderate stature, long-headed, oval-faced, narrow-nosed, with small features. They were not at all a powerfully built race. The newcomers, on the other hand, were characterized by short, square skulls, showing a great development of the superciliary ridges and eyebrows. The cheekbones, nose, and chin were prominent, and the powerful lower jaw was supplied with large teeth. They were a tall, strongly built race and must have presented, at any rate, as far as men were concerned, a fierce, brutal appearance. The dead were buried in round barrows. Inhumation being practiced, they knew about the use of copper and introduced into England the breaker-type pot. A similar migration of a large people with brachycephalic skulls occurred in North America around 1000 BC. Their arrival separated archaic culture from the so-called early woodland. They were familiar with the use of copper tools and weapons, which included tanged daggers and socketed spearheads. The European Celts and American Allegwe likewise buried their dead in conical earth mounds, many of them surrounded by a moat. Their ceremonial centers were alike circular hinges. A hinge is defined as a circular earthwork with an interior ditch and an outer earthen wall. Accordingly, it would appear that both peoples belonged to a kindred stock and undertook similar religious practices. Allegwe burials typically involved cremation or extending the corpse into a burial vault. Pottery was not generally included, but the ceramic vessels they did use were similar to the bell breakers in having a sort of tulip shape to them. Allegwe pottery finds its match in Mikkelsburg, where a type of rough pottery dating to circa 3500 BC shares the same tulip design. Earthworks near the German town suggest a connection with England's Windmill Hill in Wiltshire. Both Western Europe sites are Neolithic hilltop forts or settlements pierced by numerous entrances and quite similar to the Adena Fort, ancient, and Fort Hill in Ohio. At Windmill Hill, the skeleton of a man was found that was encased in a certain kind of clay, unlike any clay ever found in this country, and had been burned after it was adjusted to the subject, some of the charcoal still remaining. This person was to have been taller in life than 6 feet in height, with large bones and a broad underjaw. The front of the head receded so much as to leave no forehead. A burned clay vase or urn about 3 feet in height was found standing upright, into which the whole skeleton of a man had been compressed, the top of the urn being covered with burned clay. Resting against the outside of the urn was a similar skeleton, supposed to be that of a female. Pipes were found within the skeletons, which had been molded from some plastic material and glazed and burned, on which were skillfully portrayed the likeness of different human faces and other fancied or real objects. Although each pipe has several faces exactly alike, yet they are entirely unlike those on the other pipes. The entire group represents broad, round, oval, oblong, and conical-shaped faces, not caricatures, but careful, skillful, and truthful representations of nature. Stone tubes and stones that had been wrought into many curious and beautiful forms, many of them perforated, a process requiring great skill and patience, were found in mounds with the previously described giant skeletons. Comparisons between 2nd millennium BC bellbreaker people and contemporaneous Americans are so close in many particulars, a relationship of at least some kind seems undeniable. Further research may yet prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Allegwe may in fact have been the Celts of the Roman-era Europe. And they weren't the same people, but they were people who were given information from those same types of people. Well, Chapter 44, Werewolves in the Ancient Old World in Pre-Columbian America. Chapter 44, Werewolves in the Ancient Old World in Pre-Columbian America. Early rituals aimed at inducing an altered state of consciousness were similarly employed by shamans or medicine men worldwide. Was their common practice an instrumental kind of spirituality fundamental to human nature, or was it a pre-Columbian legacy introduced by shapeshifters from beyond? Dun, 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 the plot thickens. Warning, warning, we are now entering Moonbat territory. Warning. To modern Americans, werewolves are nothing more than silly images trotted out by Hollywood movie makers every few years in new films on a familiar theme. But long before Michael Landon or Lon Chaney Jr. underwent their cinematic transformations, the political, military, and most significantly, spiritual origins of human civilization itself were rooted in werewolf energy. The foundation myth of ancient Rome told how Romulus and Remus were human twins suckled by a she-wolf, the Lupa Romana. They grew up to become invincible warriors, overcoming and then uniting all Italian tribes to create Roman civilization. Love that, don't you? I love that. That's just great. They united all the Italian tribes and created Roman civilization. So all the Roman civilization was founded on some fucking werewolves. That's just wonderful. I mean, they really believe that. The symbol of their unification was a bundle of wooden sticks bound together by a leather strap, a mighty axe at its center. This was the fasces. It signified that while the various tribes could be individually beaten, Just as single sticks were easily broken, united around a central authority, they were unconquerable. This concept made Rome great, and it was the same imagery used successfully more than 2,000 years later by Thomas Jefferson when he selected the ancient fasces to identify the new American Revolution. Now, isn't that interesting? Thomas Jefferson would have chosen that symbol of these Roman werewolves, considering Thomas Jefferson was the guy who single-handedly changed the belief that the mound builders were a separate race, which they indeed were, than the Native Americans, which inhabited this land later. Boy, the plot thickens, doesn't it? My God. You know, I've talked about this several times. You know, I didn't fucking plan on this shit. Don't associate the kookiness of this information with me. I'm not the kooky one here. People always try to do that. Oh, Josh Reeves talking about kooky shit. Well, man, I'm not the one that's fucking... I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make this stuff happen. But goddamn, you know, I never would have dreamed that all my years of research would have culminated in every goddamn science fiction thing we've ever seen come to life. And that's pretty much what it is. You know, that's pretty much what I tell people now when they ask me. So tell me, man, you know, what's the deal with all this stuff? You know, break it down for me. What's the real deal? And I just say, well, okay, you know, all the movies you've ever seen your whole life? Zombie movies, space movies, science fiction, werewolves, Dracula, fucking, you know, all of it. Yeah, it's all true. It's all real. You know? Jesus Christ. Now werewolves. We have to deal with fucking werewolves coming in the picture now. Well, this is just fucking wonderful. Great. But there's something to this. I wouldn't have said there was anything to this until I read that. You know what I mean? Like, knowing what I've already read about Thomas Jefferson and how he single-handedly, I mean, he conducted many excavations on these mound sites himself, oversaw many of these digs. And he just so happens to use this Roman symbol for these werewolves that united the tribes as his symbol for the U.S. House of Representatives? God damn. And see, that kind of stuff, and there's all, I mean, we're just littered with these Roman and Italian iconography throughout our country, and yet people say, oh, it's the Jews. Yeah, the Jews run it all. Although they were used by Benito Mussolini as the emblem of his fascist movement. So there again, you see Thomas Jefferson using, you know, these same symbols that were later used by Benito Mussolini. I mean, hello? There is a connection there, whether or not you want to see it or not. Oh, tell us, Josh, how could there be a connection between Thomas Jefferson and Benito Mussolini, who came much later? Well, working for the same people, taking orders from the same place. The Romans consecrated a southern constellation near the Milky Way, east of Centaurus, as Lupus the wolf, related perhaps to the Norse cosmic wolf Fenris. Their attraction to wolfish imagery pointed up the militaristic dynamism of this people during the centuries before their decline into self-indulgent materialism. With the collapse of their society, all the spiritual values of preceding millennia were demonized by the Christian church triumphant. Yeah, it brings a whole new meaning to that symbol that the Fabian Society, the Fabian Socialist Society uses. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's exactly what they are. Despite rigorous oppression, some of the earlier cults managed to survive, mostly as underground movements. But they occasionally made themselves known in popular folk holidays like Samhain, Halloween, or Beltane, May Day, and some of the greatest literature of the Middle Ages. That's just fitting that we're reading this on Friday the 13th, isn't it? Such as stories of the Grail Knights and King Arthur. Even among the masonry of churches and cathedrals appeared subtle heathen themes, such as sculpted images of the Green Man, a Celtic variant of the Roman Lupercus. Celtic holy men, the Druids, believed that they could infuse themselves and their initiates with the spirit of the wolf to become invincible in battle. These elite troops were known as the Ufanar, literally werewolves, who transformed themselves into much of the same manner that the later Norse of Scandinavia underwent special training as berserkers or werebears, human warriors with the strength and fury of a wild bear. And where did they learn how to do this from? These same druids got their information from these ancient Amorites as well. This is some kind of ancient knowledge on how to tap into and access otherwise unaccessible and unobtainable raw animal energy that somehow enacts on your physiology. And you'll notice that they were talking about the hallucinogenic drugs and how this ties into that at the very beginning of this movie, and how, at the very beginning of this chapter, and how these shaman and medicine men that use these psychoactive plants would, basically bring this raw animal energy out of people using these hallucinogenic drugs. And there's a very interesting movie that came out in the early 1980s called Altered States. And it stars William Hurt. And William Hurt is a scientist in this, and he's doing all these experiments with different psychedelic drugs. And he's taking these psychedelic drugs and going into a flotation tank, a sensory deprivation flotation tank. And during one of his trips, his mind and his brain during this trip actually start to regress back to some primordial, proto-human, crazy werewolf-type monster, literally. And I just thought that's an interesting correlation. Here's this movie made like 1980, 1981, something like that. Altered States, it's out there. I think it just came out on Blu-ray or something this week. It's like I heard about that. But definitely check that movie out if you hadn't checked it out. And you'll see what I'm talking about, because William Hurt literally starts regressing back to some like monster primordial creature thing because of his regression with these psychedelic drugs in the sensory deprivation tank. And he breaks out and he's like, "Rah," and he goes to the zoo and he's like eating fucking animals in the zoo like a wild, crazy beast. There's something to this. In a medieval Russian folk custom, anyone desirous of becoming a werewolf invoked the moon goddess with the words, "Towards the dull herd wanders the shaggy wolf. Moon, moon, gold-horned moon, check the flight of bullets, blunt the hunter's knives, break the shepherd's cudgels, cast wild fear upon all cattle, on men, on all creeping things, that they may not catch the gray wolf. My word is binding, more binding than sleep, more binding than the promise of a hero." As late as AD 435, St. Patrick complained that his efforts to Christianize Ireland were opposed by many families of werewolves, that is, practitioners of the old European nature cult. He and his New World Order won out, however, and the old religion, while incapable of being extirpated, was nevertheless forced deeper underground as a dark age fell over the Western mind. Around AD 950, however, a repressed paganism suddenly broke forth to publicly reassert itself in Mercia, a former Anglo-Saxon kingdom in southern England. The audacious revolt was led by a pair of unrepentant Druid priests, one of whom called himself Werewolf. Predictably, church authorities reacted against their attempt with torture and pulpit propaganda. The very name werewolf became synonymous for outlaw and spirit wolf and was applied to all damnable opponents of the dominant Christian paradigm. Well, that sounds familiar. That's exactly the same thing they did with Enki. When they found out he wanted to teach mankind the secrets of who we are, where we came from, that's how he started the first secret society, the Brotherhood of the Snake, Brotherhood of the Serpent. And when they found out, they banished him to reincarnate in fragile human bodies over and over again. That's what we know as Quetzalcoatl and Onas and Viracocha and all these different, Jesus, all these different things. But then he told people, they told people that, he was actually Lucifer, or actually the devil, and made up this thing. So anytime Enki would appear, the people would believe that, that's an evil energy when it is not. Competition from a resurgence of folkish mystery religions was not to be tolerated. From the Middle Ages down to the Industrial Age, wolves were demonized to the brink of extinction. upsetting the natural order of wildlife and leading to a population explosion of deer and other former prey, resulting in the spread of virtually unknown communicable pathogens such as Lyme disease. Werewolf cult followers were simultaneously condemned as agents of Satan and or the doomed victims of an evil curse. Well into the 1940s, Hollywood perpetuated the characterization in numerous Wolfman movies with memorably melodramatic doggerels such as, even a man who was pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolf's bane blooms and the moon is full and bright. According to the great Roman epic poet Virgil, the first werewolf was Moeris, wife of the fate goddess Moera, who taught him how to bring the dead back to life. Romans knew the werewolf itself as Verispellus, or turnskin. Standard bearers in the ancient Roman army wore a long draping headgear of wolfskin, symbolizing the lupine nursing of Romulus and Remus and the wolf spirit fierceness of Rome's invincible armed forces. This headgear was the Galilea lupina, a helmet shaped like a wolf head, as first worn by Romulus when he led his followers in wolfskins to establish the foundation of Rome against their outnumbering enemies. The Roman Lupercalia demonstrated Roman veneration of the animal's powerful qualities. The name derives from the Latin lupercal, or wolf's den, where initiation rituals took place. These were conducted by the Lupercari, or the Luperci. The Luperci priests who became werewolves. Their faces smeared with blood for the sacrifice. God damn, we got Roman priests turning into werewolves now? Shit. Is that what the fucking Jesuits is? Is that what we're going to find out, that the fucking Jesuits are all goddamn werewolves? Great. Fuck, I never wanted to get up here and tell you to lock and load, boys, but, may want to start thinking about putting some money in silver bullets. Jesus Christ. That's all we fucking need. Jesuit fucking werewolves. Great. Should have fucking known better. Should have expected that. Should have seen that coming. The Luperci priests who became werewolves, their faces smeared with the blood of sacrifice for the duration of the Wolf Festival in order to personally identify with Lupercus and receive his blessings and protection. Late 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche execrated some would-be revolutionaries who have the courage of the knife but not of the blood. The purpose of the Lupercalia was to make its followers familiar with both. The Luperci formed secret fraternities in which dogs and goats were sacrificed because they symbolized the protectors of the flocks, and the flocks themselves preyed upon by wolves. Celebrated every February 15th in a cave at the foot of Mount Aventine, it was an important fertility holiday honoring Lupercus, or Luperca, and the god of agriculture, crops, prophecy, and, surprisingly perhaps, cattle and herds. These are some of the same features divinely patronized by Rome's war god Mars, recalling his Teutonic equivalent Tyre, who was likewise associated with the wolf. Both reveal the ancestral Indo-European background from which the Romans and Norse sprang. An even older festival was the Feronia, philologically suggestive of the Norse Fenris, celebrated in Italy by the Sabines before the foundation of Rome itself, and named after their tribal wolf mother. Her consort was Seranus, a primeval god who dwelled in the forest where he was revered as the underground lord of death. Seranus reincarnated with each sunrise, a theme found throughout wolf myth, wherein the beast and the sun are closely affiliated and sometimes interchangeable. The annual Feronia was faithfully observed throughout Roman times, its rites performed by members of a sacred clan famous for its profound antiquity. Priests and followers were allegedly capable of prodigious psychic accomplishments, such as walking in barefooted processions over burning coals. The secrets of these and other miraculous deeds of self-mastery were passed down in initiation rituals through successive generations going back to the Stone Age times and long before. Here, as in other blood-related cultures, The leading motifs of death, rebirth, lone courage, and fighting endurance were personified in the wolf and spiritually transferred to the warrior. These were mystery cults in the sense that their practice was sacred and available only to suitable initiates willing to undergo trials and instruction. An Egyptian war god with lineage going back to pre-dynastic times was Apu-At, the opener of the way, so called for his ability to break through the enemy's ranks and portrayed in temple art as a werewolf. His body was entirely black, signifying death to the foe, but his headdress and loincloth were gold, as were the Ankh, or the cross of life he held in his hand, and at his side, with his left, he grasped a golden scepter topped with the head of a bird of prey, avian reptile. That's what this shit is, isn't it? The reptilian serpent god, serpent priest, shapeshifter part of into this versus the other end of the New World Order that's all werewolves. Is that what we're getting to here? Because I'm ready. I'm down. I mean, I'm ready to blow the heads off some reptiles and some fucking werewolves whenever y'all are. That's what that goddamn movie Underworld, all those Underworld movies with fucking hot-ass Kate Beckinsale. She is a fucking nice ass. I just got to say it. Sorry, ladies. I'm sorry. I got to apologize. God damn, she's got a nice ass. If you've never seen the movies Underworld, dude, that's what it's all about. So the vampires in the movie are actually the reptiles. It makes sense because they kind of look like reptiles, right? Man, should have known. So he has a scepter. He's a wolf that has a scepter with the head of a bird of prey on it. He probably symbolizing either, that's his prey. That's who he's out to kill, is this bird, and that's why he has it on the scepter that he carries. Or maybe that's who he's worshipped. Maybe they're subservient to these reptiles. Who knows? A stylized talon at the scepter's base on top of the scepter, which is topped with a head of the bird of prey. From the neck down, Apu-At resembled a man, but his head was that of a wolf. Throughout time, as Egyptian society grew less threatened by outside aggression and settled into stable prosperity, Apu-At's original military identity gave way to mortuary duties. Now he had the head of a jackal, deemed more suitable to his role as the divine patron of embalming and mummification. Because the scavenging beast was notorious for snooping around cemeteries and known to dig up freshly buried corpses if given half a chance. He is best remembered in the West by his Greek name, Anubis. And isn't that interesting? Anubis Caves, right on the border of Colorado and Oklahoma. You'll see footage about this in my new film. They got alignments there that line up to celestial events and the solstice, and they found a depiction of Anubis there. Jeez fucking Louise. They also found Celtic type of writing and stuff there as well. God. Oh, man. You mean I'm going to have to fucking start believing in fucking werewolves, too? God damn it. Oh, man. This is just fucking great. My day was going just fine. Got to find out fucking werewolves are fucking thrown in the mix now. Jesus. 2nd century geographer Pausanias observed that the god's original incarnation, Apu-At, gave his name to the Greek sun god Apollo. He was in fact worshipped as wolfish Apollo Lycasius. Oh, great. Apollo, Apollyon, the great beast. Why did we name all our NASA shit Apollo? Oh, man. Don't tell me the next rabbit hole I'm going to fall down is a werewolf hole. Jesus. Because these guys are way into that stuff, man. I mean, you just can't. Apollo, Apollyon, I mean, that ties in with Freemasonry. Jeez Louise. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I mean, this is legit, y'all. Because I mean, all this other stuff adds up with other things I already know that these guys are very well into. Jesus. He was in fact worshipped as wolfish Apollo Lycasius, from which the word lycanthropy or werewolfism derives. God. Oh, my goodness. I knew that word, but I didn't know it stemmed from Apollo Lycasius. My goodness. So Apollo was a fucking werewolf. Makes sense why they have the Apollo mission, and Apollyon is like the Antichrist. Oh, man. Socrates taught at the famous Lyceum, or Wolf Temple. The sacred werewolf goes back in Greek history at least as long as the Bronze Age, 2000 to 1200 BC, when Zeus Lycasius, or Lycasion, was the divine wolf king of the Pelagasians, or the Sea Peoples, a pre-Hellenic inhabitant of Peloponnesus. The barbaric Scythians instituted a religious group in the Nueri who annually transformed themselves into werewolves during occultic warrior festivals. The Scythians were widely feared for their ferocity in battle. To the ancient Teutons in Norse, Fenris, or Fenrir, was a cosmic wolf chained by the gods, the Aesir, as part of their attempt to bring order to the world. While he was being fettered, Fenris bit off the left hand of Tyr, the war god. Ever since, the left hand has been known as the Sinstros, or unlucky. The ancients believed that when the Aesir's world order begins to fall apart just before doomsday, Fenris will break free from his bonds to swallow the sun and bring upon mankind an age of darkness. Jesus, that sounds like fucking Underworld. In fact, the Vikings called the first and darkest month after winter solstice Fenrir. The deep antiquity of this imagery likewise demonstrates the common origins of diverse peoples. The Norse Fenris and Lupa of the Etruscans, the pre-Roman inhabitants of western Italy, who dominated much of the Mediterranean Sea from 1200 BC to 200 BC, were virtually identical. Significantly, Lupa devoured the sun every winter solstice as a necessary part of rebirth. Here's maybe another explanation as to why we see these alignments in these mounds here. Oh, man. Werewolves are known as far away as the Philippines and China, where they are still revered as the Aswang and the Lang Ren, respectively. Often they are regarded with a mixture of terror and veneration, particularly in the Baltic, where the Finnish and Latvians will sometimes lead courageous followers to hidden treasures, an apparent folk memory of werewolf cult practices from pre-Christian times. Even today, the Portuguese Bruxa and Serbian Wurdelak, for all their awful ferocity, are synonymous with justifiable homicide and honor-bound revenge. A somewhat common Slovakian family name is Vladilak, literally meaning werewolf. The vast scope of this cultural phenomenon, extending continuously back through several millennia and among disparate peoples unknown to each other, implies the primal rootedness in a dark but integral region of human consciousness. In fact, clinical lycanthropy is a mental disorder in which afflicted persons are convinced that they can transform themselves into another animal, often a wolf. Such a rare condition may partially account for the persistent worldwide belief in werewolves. More importantly, they are the theranthropic results of shamanism, wherein a man or woman achieves an altered state of consciousness to spiritually identify with the soul of a non-human animal. And again, that's referenced in that movie Altered States with William Hurt. In Turkish, for example, the Kurdidam is not only a werewolf, but also a shaman. In fact, the totemic ancestor of the Turks is the wolf. Werewolves are still taken very seriously in many parts of the modern world. Indigenous tribal peoples throughout the Americas are firm believers in skinwalkers, known across Canada as Wendigo or Witico, and to the Mohawk Indians of the continental United States as Lemenkin. South of the Rio Grande, the werewolves were jaguars, survivors of a potent cult that was the spiritual centerpiece of America's first civilizers, the Olmecs, 3,500 to 5,000 years ago. The cult spread from the Valley of Mexico to South America and lives today among the Runa Urdarungu of Argentina and Ecuador's Canima. Werbeast imagery profusely covers the stone ruins of Peru's seminal Chavín de Huántar, going back at least to the 13th century BC. Across the continent to the San Augustine ceremonial centers of Colombia. Oh, wow. Listen to this. Retrieved from Kentucky's Ayers Mound, Ayers, Ayers Mound on Eagle Creek near Liberty in Owen County. If we got anybody out in Kentucky, get us some info on this. I've never heard of this. My goodness, here we go. What are we going to hear out? So somehow these werewolves relate to mounds too? God damn it. I was hoping they weren't going to say that. Oh, is this why people are shitting their bricks over like their rock wall stuff? Is this shit tying into some like ancient werewolf shit or something? Fuck ancient aliens. We're getting into ancient werewolves now. Jesus Christ. I don't know if I can handle this, y'all. I really don't. I'm not trying to be dramatic here. I'm being serious. I don't know if I can handle this or not. I'm fine with reptilian shapeshifters and having to deal with those fuckers. I'm fine with having to deal with gray aliens, but god damn it, dude. If this shit becomes like Fright Night or something, I'm out of here. Wolfman's got nards. Jesus Christ, fucking Wolfman, Frankenstein's gonna show up. Fucking Teen Wolf will show up too. I mean, it's gonna be a fucking party. Oh my goodness. Retrieved from Kentucky's Ayers Mounds on Eagle Creek near New Liberty in Owen County, Kentucky, a spatula precisely cut from the upper jaw of mature wolf belonged to one of the most bizarre finds yet made by American archaeologists. They found nearby the elongated skull of a big-boned, tall adult male whose incisors and canines of his upper jaw had been deliberately cut out in a careful surgical operation to allow for neat insertion of the wolf's spatula in the man's mouth. Man, my fucking hair on my arm is standing up right now. Woo! I just got a fucking cold chill over my body. Oh, my God. They found a fucking giant man in a mound in Kentucky who had a meticulous surgical operation with a wolf jaw attached to his mouth? What the fuck? Oh, man, this is fucked up. I don't like this, man. Woo! Apparently, he wore it in life as the component of a mask or headgear. It reminds me of, there was a character, what was it? It was the Kurgan. You ever see the Highlander? There can be only one. I am Connor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, and I cannot die. Right? Sean Connery? Put that one on your list if you haven't seen the original Highlander either. But in the first Highlander movie, Clancy Brown, the actor Clancy Brown, plays a character called the Kurgan. And the Kurgan is this big, tall motherfucker who is much visibly bigger than everybody else. You can see it at the beginning of the movie when a young Connor MacLeod in Scotland goes to fight him, and he says, leave the young one for me. He knows he's immortal, so he wants to go and take his head because, there can be only one. So when he gets off it, lightning and stuff happens, and he's wearing a mask that fits that same description of like a wolf head mask. The Kurgan is wearing, and yes, he's a giant. Jesus Christ, they found the fucking Kurgan buried in Kentucky. Great. It was maybe part of a costume for impersonating a wolf or part of some kind of shamanic activity. So precise was his dental work that infection never set in, as revealed by microscopic examination. And the procedure itself was followed by normal tissue and bone growth, a remarkable surgical achievement for a pre-modern culture. His was not the only surviving specimen of such strange attire. Other wolf spatulas and human jaws similarly cut out for their insertion have been excavated from 10 or more contemporaneous burial mounds throughout Ohio and Kentucky. suggesting that a respected werewolf cult was practiced by the Adena inhabitants. Adena is a purely archaeological term applied to a people remembered by Native American tribal elders as the Allegwe or the Allegheny. They appeared suddenly around 1000 BC on the eastern seaboard, spread rapidly to the Mississippi River, and settled primarily in the Ohio Valley. Credited with the introduction of agriculture, stone fort hills, and iron foundries, they were eventually exterminated by ancestors of today's Plains Indians in the early 8th century A.D. Their earthworks containing werewolf regalia were self-evident burials for shamans belonging to a lupine cult. The Adena's elaborate headgear has been underscored by the discovery of related artifacts, including an effigy pipe, its stem fashioned to resemble a wolf's head, from the Inglewood Mound near Dayton, Ohio. Celtic artists likewise favored the portrayal of wolf heads, an outstanding example being the baked clay mouth of a trumpet, the creature's jaws agape, from the Fort Hill of Numancia in Spain. Clearly, the relationship we share with the wolf is as psychologically intimate as it is profoundly ancient. Something kindred has always blurred otherwise clear distinctions separating the beast from the human within us. Only that, perhaps, can explain our apparently endemic fascination for the werewolf. As such, the question arises, are close parallels between werewolf worship in the ancient Old World and the pre-Columbian New World explained by a universal impulse intrinsic to all mankind, or are they a part of the evidence for overseas influences at work in the Americas during antiquity? Chapter 45, Who were the First Americans? Though the Siberian ancestors of today's Plains Indians undoubtedly migrated over the Bering Strait during the last ice age some 16,000 years ago, they were not the only people to inhabit North America, nor, it now appears, may they have been our continent's earliest residents. Scientists of the recently formed North Atlantic Biocultural Organization, NABO, have made it clear that Asiatic migration via the Bering Straits was not the only possible path taken by prehistoric peoples into the New World. If so, could Kennewick Man, the 10,000-year-old Caucasian-like skeleton found in Washington State's Columbia River, be related to the oldest cultures of Western Europe? A definite answer may be forthcoming in the new theory concerning North America's human origins. It also addresses the dispersal of peoples across our country from a circumpolar culture, which was responsible not only for mass migration between the two major continents, but also for the interbreeding and establishment of hybrid cultures. The possibilities prompted directors of the Center for the Study of First Americans at Oregon State University to process genetic testing of human remains found both in eastern North America and Western Europe. Further examination of the human mitochondrial cells may prove a Caucasoid link to the origins of the first Americans, dating as far back as 28,000 BC. Bam! There it is. It's absolutely true. I've got clips. This was probably written before this was proven, but it's absolutely true. A Caucasoid link to the origins of the first Americans dating as far back as 28,000 BC. They found artifacts at Russell Cave in Alabama that are like 12 and 14,000 BC. Known as the power packs of DNA, these cells help scientists develop 4 categories of ancestral groups or lineages that are viewed as the founding genetic material for Native Americans. Congruent with existing dogma and fueling arguments in favor of Asiatic origins for the New World population, they could be traced back to Siberia and Northeast Asia, specifically the Baikal and Altai-Sian regions. And I love how it goes Altai. I mean, Altai's the entrance into inner Earth. And, you know, the natives always say their people literally came out of the earth. However, there is a 5th lineage also credited among the founding genetic strains of present-day Native Americans, known as the haplogroup X. This genetic signature is the vestige of either a later population found in Europe and the Middle East or a primeval population of Caucasoid ethnic groups that inhabited Asia. Most Americans taught the Bering Strait theory as a sole explanation for the peopling of our continent and are unaware that it is no longer entirely accepted even by scientific dogmatists. I gotta say, as a red-haired giant myself, I love all this talk of red-haired giants. Finally, we're getting our day. I'm kidding. But yes, I am a red-haired giant. I'm proud of it. Archaeological finds in South America along the North American eastern seaboard show conclusively that there were several distinct and separate migrations of different racial groups among the Americas during prehistory. Furthermore, recent studies point to the hypothesis of a North Atlantic crescent, composed of water and ice to serve as a bridge between the two land masses that connected Europe with the Americas. In December 2000, archaeocartographers of the National Geographic Society mapped a European theory for the possible migration of at least some Native American peoples. Scientific American, discovering archaeology with its January 2nd, 2000 issue, already broached an Atlantic route. It depicted northern island hopping possibilities from Iceland to Greenland, then Labrador, which is still possible today by following present ice cover. Arctic waters provide abundance of seafood and enable travelers to eat as they go, as witness Inuit Thule Eskimo migration from Alaska to Greenland. This sudden turnabout, the admission of a possible alternative diffusion to the Americas, followed hard on the discovery of a rare X factor in mitochondrial DNA among the indigenous peoples of both North Europe and North America. It demonstrates a fundamental shift in mainstream scientific opinion. The X pattern, or European X lineage, joins the already well-known linkage of O blood type among North American natives. It should be B type if they came from Asia. And modern Aboriginal populations along the Atlantic fringe of Europe, the mountain border of Norway, Sweden, the west coast Ireland, and the Pyrenees Mountains, referred to variously as Old European, Modern Cro-Magnon, or Paleo-Atlantid. They were tall, heavy-browed, ruddy-complected, and brunette, sometimes light-eyed, with a high Rh negative factor. Now, that's interesting, a high Rh negative factor, because that's what it was said that the Anunnaki had. They're blown up because the Rh negative means there's no rhesus monkey involved, so that in any of the lineage. You come from a separate lineage that didn't come from a rhesus monkey. Transatlantic migrations involving these deeply ancient genotypes are enumerated by a growing frequency of genetic comparisons with North American Aboriginal tribes. In Newfoundland, survivors from at least one of these migrations persisted until their forcible extinction in 1829. They spoke a linguistic isolate bearing no connection to nearby mainland peoples, whether Inuit, Eskimo, or Algonquin. Genetic sequencing of haplotypes reveals that more than one migratory event took place. As one DNA study stated, the notion of a homogeneous American Indian genetic pool does not conform with these and other results. You hear that? Let me read that for you one more time. And if any of you are, I know some of you are, I've talked to, like Michael and others, you know, or in the tribe, or know people in the tribe, let me repeat this for you one more time. The notion of a homogeneous American Indian genetic pool does not conform with these and other results. Mummies of Caucasoid persons have been found at South America's pre-Columbian sites, some of which appear to have been populated by more than 50,000 residents. As these ruins continue to yield such atypical evidence, it appears that many of America's ancient civilizations were founded by seafaring peoples with long traditions of open water voyages. Rather than walking 10,000 miles from Mongolia to Chile, the first Americans may have sailed first class. And where they came from will soon be firmly resolved by DNA testing. From red-headed mummies in Peru's pre-Inca graves to blonde-headed Toltec warrior priests in central Mexico, This is not the history of our father's generation. Pre-Columbian tombs are shattering the adage that dead men tell no tales. Great steps in understanding the real origins of America are being made. They are striding over the academically dead corpses of fearful, politically correct social historians who now find themselves haunted by the long-dead bodies of Stone Age Americans. Some archaeologists have built their own academic and financial empires based on theories invalidated by modern genetics. DNA research has placed all upholders of the old paradigm under siege, and when the lab returns are in, they will be looking out for job restraining. And that's it. That's all she wrote. We have come to the end of that book, and boy, it was a good one. Lots of great stuff in there. I'm just sitting here scrolling. Everything in here is referenced, indexed. We'll definitely have to go back and reference this book when I'm researching the film and working on the different films and stuff. But yeah, that's the end of The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. The Lost Worlds of Ancient America. That's the end of that book. Chapter 31, Prehistoric Aviators of the Andes. Our readers know that the Wright brothers were the first men to fly a heavier than air craft, but another set of brothers, Jacques and Joseph Montgolfier, are credited with having successfully piloted the earliest hot air balloon in late 18th century France. Virtually every chronology of aviation is based on these two historic facts. One of them, however, is a fallacy. Aircraft aficionados are mostly unaware that the first fully documented human flight took place 74 years before the Montgolfier brothers. The true honor instead goes to Bartholomew de Gusmão, pronounced Gusamau. On August 8, 1709, he readied a small skiff made of woven reeds attached by thin, sturdy cords to a huge triangular envelope made of cotton and paper. When fully inflated, resembled an irregular pyramid. John V, King of Portugal, watched with his assembled court and a great crowd of spectators as a small fire filled the envelope with smoke. Gusmão hopped aboard La Passarola, the Sparrow, which, to the amusement of spectators on the ground, rose vertically and majestically to about 60 feet in the air, then drifted with a mild wind more than a mile from Lisbon Castle of St. George to the House of India. Landing gently on the lawn of the Colonel office to wide popular acclaim and royal favor, the pilot was hailed as El Voyador, the Flying Man. King John personally granted him a patent for La Passarola, the military potential of which was even then apparent by its debut, which was recorded by Vatican archives as the first successful flight in human history. But El Voyador's glory was short-lived, as was he himself. Hounded by politically powerful religious fanatics who condemned his invention as a blasphemous device of the devil that enabled sinful man to storm heaven, Gusmão fled to Toledo, Spain, where he died impoverished and forgotten at age 38. Not until the advent of the Wright brothers' first heavier-than-air flight was the Portuguese flying man's achievement rediscovered, ironically enough, by French researchers who found a conflicting claim to the world's first aviation honors held by their own national heroes, the Montgolfier brothers. The story of 1709's previously neglected exploit became so popular that the Aeronautical Academy of Bartholomew de Gusmão flourished in Paris from the turn of the century through 1920s. Until the economic crash of 1929, its members raised substantial funds for commission of a large monument, then shipped it to his Brazilian birthplace, where it stands to this day neglected. An elaborate bronze plaque commemorating the flight shows a large triangular-shaped balloon flying over Old Lisbon. Beneath are inscribed the words, "The empire of the skies was reserved for the gods." until it was conquered by man on August 8, 1709. That's interesting. The empire of the sky was reserved for the gods. Yeah, flying around in their ships. That's an interesting thing to be on a statue, isn't it? See, the guys at the highest levels, it's just a fact to them. Academy members underwrote 2 additional memorials, one in Lisbon to honor the date and place of the Sparrow's inaugural flight, the other in Toledo at the Aero Pioneer's grave. They even had a medal struck to celebrate the bicentennial of his unprecedented achievement. The Academy could not survive the worldwide financial depression of the 1930s, however, and turbulent events of the following decade consigned Gusmão once again to oblivion, except for a commemorative stamp issued by the Brazilian government in 1944. Not until 33 years later was his fame resurrected by an American balloonist, James Woodman, whose work in South American archaeology brings us to a far greater mystery than the disregard still surrounding his 18th century predecessor's singular accomplishment, with which it is nonetheless strangely linked. During the early 1970s, Woodman became fascinated with the so-called Nazca Lines, the largest art gallery on Earth. This collection of outsized designs, some geometric, others portraying a variety of animals, was created by removing dark gray top cover to reveal faint yellow sand just beneath the Peruvian desert. Uncertainly bracketed with the perimeters of the 3rd century BC and 5th century AD, pre-Inca Nazca civilization is poorly understood by archaeologists. Their only clues are vividly decorated pottery remnants, massive sophisticated subterranean aquifers associated with its people, and colossal geoglyphs scattered across the arid plain. These images were not discovered until the early 1930s, and then by accident. When a local pilot happened to fly over the figures, which had gone unnoticed until then, all are superbly executed in perfect proportion, some several miles in length, demonstrating an exceptionally high degree of skill in surveying techniques, social cooperation, and the ability to accurately transfer artwork from normal-sized sketches to a gigantic scale. This lost achievement, he was particularly intrigued as an archaeologist by El Vorador's apparent indebtedness to the Brazilian natives for the triumph of La Pessoa. Further research disclosed that at least one Indian tribe, today in residence near the Honduran border, still make ceremonial aerostats like those the Portuguese missionaries saw fly 300 years ago. Investigation of Peruvian myth revealed additional clues. The Incas, Woodman discovered, honored a deity they referred to as Oricon, or Orichan, who could fly between heaven and back in a vessel of golden flames, imagery implying a gondola equipped with its fire pot suspended beneath a hot air balloon. Even more suggestive was the ancient Andean hero Artaquai, the boy god who reconnoitred for Incan armies by flying high over battlefields and returning to the emperor with intelligence about army dispositions. The myth of Antarqui lends credence to the possibility that Andean lads, because of their light weight, were used to fly military observation balloons. Boys actually did serve as military observers while strapped to large leather-made kites for Greek armies in the field some 200 years before the advent of Nazca civilization. The first such aerial reconnaissance had been invented by Archichets of Tantarum, a philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, statesman, and strategist around 400 BC. The following century, unmanned hot air balloons were being flown over China. It is possible, then, that similar contemporaneous advances in aviation were undertaken by pre-Columbian South Americans. Better known than Antarqui was Kon-Tiki Viracocha, the Incas' red-bearded, light-complected, fair-eyed sounding father who fled as a flood survivor from some natural catastrophe. Yeah, Viracocha. There he is, red beard, light-complected. Seafoam, a reference to his white skin and oceanic origins, probably an Atlantean, allegedly shared the high wisdom of his lost homeland with native peoples to create Andean civilization. Among the cultural gifts he bequeathed was the aerostat, or hot air balloon, A standard image in Nazca art may be a direct reference to and, in fact, a symbol for this gift. The likeness of a sea eagle or frigate bird appears as the single most reproduced animal throughout Peru's Pacific coastal pottery remnants. The bird is remarkable for its ability to inflate its gullet to a grotesque size in midair, resembling a balloon in flight. Most Nazca drawings depict birds, likewise suggesting flight. Of these, the most cogent to our investigation is a half-human image, the so-called Owl Man, regarded as one of the oldest bioglyphs. It portrays a standing 98-foot-long anthropomorphic figure with the head of an owl incised into the sloping face of a cliff. Like its companions, the ground drawing may be properly appreciated only from the perspective of altitude at several hundred feet. Its gestures with his right hand lifted toward heaven while its left points toward the earth. It is as though the figure were indicating something integrally important concerning all Nazca lines. If you want to see us properly, you have got to go into the sky. Owlman is a misconceived name, however, because it appears to have been originally associated with a sorceress similarly portrayed on Nazca pottery and still revered by mountain Indians. Often shown holding a San Pedro cactus in her left hand, she was and is worshipped as a supernatural guardian of highland lagoons where the plant grows. Well, yeah. Hello? Hello? Let me tell you something right now, buddy. You do enough San Pedro cactus, your ass is going to be out there carving fucking shit into the rock thinking you're talking to the gods, too. Because San Pedro cactus is what they derive mescaline from. That's a fact. I mean, I wouldn't tell you can go down to Home Depot and buy you a San Pedro cactus for $26 and extract the mescaline out of it, eat it, and trip balls if you really wanted to, but, you know, you could if you were so inclined. I wouldn't suggest it, though. This hallucinogenic cactus, when ingested, makes possible the well-known flight of the shaman. An out-of-body experience shamans use to soar up to the gods for healing and wisdom. Containing mescaline, the San Pedro cactus does indeed produce convincing sensations of flight in anyone who ingests it. Fuck him! If he thought he could fly, he should have started from the ground. Bill Higgs, young man on acid, jumped out of a window today. It's a good point, though. You know, that's always my thing. You know, if you're on hallucinogenic drugs and you are going to try to fly, again, always try to start from the ground, okay? Don't go up on a building. Bad news. Whether the desert drawings imply drug-induced astral projection or balloon flight, an aerial experience related to the glyphs seems suggested. Even non-avian depictions point to a connection with the heavens. The dog and fox, both portrayed on the Nazca Plain, were symbolic messengers between divine. That's a microcosm for the much larger stuff with the Jesuits I've been screaming about for almost 5 years now. Because this guy goes on these missionary expeditions to to Peru and Brazil. Somewhere along the way, he comes into some ancient knowledge. And what's he do? He takes this ancient knowledge, applies it, and becomes the first man to fly. All with information he gained from these people who had advanced knowledge. So that right there, folks, is very telling and very much proves what I've been saying for years and years and years, is that these quote-unquote missionaries are never on a mission to spread the gospel. They were there to gain information, to use, and to absorb into their priest class, and then report back to their masters, who and the masters and war generals who are in the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And you think it's a coincidence that all the people that were funding Contras for the eradication of the indigenous populations there to take and spread Christianity to them, you think it's a coincidence that all the people involved in Iran-Contra, from Oliver North to Pat Buchanan to Larry Pratt and on and on and on, all just happen to be members of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta? Not a coincidence at all. The Jesuits, that's why the Jesuits are kind of, they're not the guys getting their hands dirty. There's a clip in Secret Right Volume 2 that's very telling, and that's exactly in my research what I've found. These guys are the brains. They're not the brawn. The Jesuits are the brains. They're the information holders. They're the knowledge keepers. They're the ones that formulate plans and plans of action and strategies that serve the agenda. And the Sovereign Military Order of Malta is the end that executes said plans. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So this guy goes and learns all this stuff from the natives and becomes the first man to fly. Huh. So what's that say about the information that these natives had? Far more important than just a bunch of savages, I'd say, don't you? But again, where'd they get it from? And, well, you're going to find that out once my Volume 1 of The Lost Secrets of Ancient America is done. So, again, please help us to get this done. Very important work. Every time I read more and more of this book, it just feels like not in a bad way, but it just feels like another weight on my shoulder. Like man, you got your work cut out for you here. Not in a bad way. I got this. Don't worry about it. As long as I get the support I need, I got this down. But man, it's just so much info, and trying to absorb it all and process it, and then also trying to make it and put it in a film. It kind of takes me some time to sort of absorb all this before I can just take it and make it work in the film, because you got to make sure it fits in with everything else that you've already been researching and doing. So it's, as I've described before, it's like making a film is like taking a 10 million piece jigsaw puzzle, throwing all the pieces up in the air and, trying to put it together. He was told that several otherwise backward tribes in Brazil and Peru were skilled in the manufacture of curious objects. They were 5-foot-tall envelopes of paper that could fly, filled with smoke rising from small clay pots of smoldering cane suspended underneath a single opening. The contraptions actually rose into air of their own accord. When questioned by the astounded friars, the Indians explained that the little hot air balloons comprised a legacy for their most ancient ancestors and were flown only for religious purposes, bringing small offerings to the sky gods. In spring 1709, Gushmal appeared in Lisbon with his own flying model. Because of its successful performance before a royal committee, the Jesuit priest from Brazil was financially encouraged to proceed with the completion of a full-size version that carried him aloft for the first time a few months later. When Woodman learned of this lost achievement, he was particularly intrigued as an archaeologist. See, he goes and finds it. They go on this supposed mission. Oh, we're going to go do missionary work to the ancient tribes. No. They go and do missionary work. He brings back this knowledge of how to make this flying machine, brings it back, makes it, it works, and then what's the first thing that is said to him as soon as he lands on the ground? I read it earlier in the chapter. As soon as he lands on the ground, just as you would expect, the first thing out of the first person's mouth that he sees is, oh boy, wow, think about the military applications of this. So boom, again, that would go into the hands of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, the Knights of Malta. See how this is done? It's no different today. It's no different today. They're the brains. The Jesuits are the brains. The Knights of Malta are the brawn. And the white Pope, Vatican stuff is all the front, front man distraction horse shit. That's all it is. The Pope is just there to be the front man like Obama or Bush or anything else. Well, meanwhile, the real power players are in the background. They're not on TV. They're not out, talking to the flock. They're doing the work. Where did I leave off? When Woodman learned of the nine spirits above in the sky and human worshippers below on the ground, Woodman was especially surprised to find that Quechua, the language spoken by the Incas, actually contains a pre-modern word for balloon maker. Moreover, some surviving examples of pottery recovered from the vicinity of the Nazca geoglyphs portray objects resembling balloons flying across the sky, trailing ropes or streamers. Nazca tapestries housed at Lima's National Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology unquestionably depict humans in flight, either through the agency of hallucinogenic pathogens or via balloons. No, see, I don't think it's either one. I think it represents these sky gods coming down and giving the humans these drugs to communicate with the gods, because there's an intimate connection between these quote unquote gods and drugs of all sorts. You got to understand, folks, down there where that area, Peru, you know what that is, right? That's Blow Central, baby. And the natives were said to have been given the cacao plant from the gods. It was considered to be a drug of the gods. And they have found, you can go Google the cocaine mummies. Go Google that, the cocaine mummies. And they, there again, more ancient people found buried with mass amounts of drugs. So I also, the people in South America, the ayahuasca shaman who make the ayahuasca mixture out of DMT. Do you know how many different alkaloids and roots and things there are in the jungle? Millions. Do you know what the chances and the odds are of finding the two specific alkaloids you need in a rainforest and a jungle to mix together to make the visionary herb ingredients to make the alkaloids for DMT that are found in ayahuasca? 1 in quadrillion trillion chances. They got this information from these sky gods, and again, they always present you with one side or the other, and I always find that the one side or the other they present you with is never the truth. They, here the example is, well, this either depicts people tripping balls or this depicts, humans flying for real or flying because they're tripping balls. And I think it actually represents these sky gods giving the people these visionary herbs as a communication device. At the Nazca Lines themselves, broad patches of scorched earth may still be observed at the intersects of drawings or atop nearby low-rises. They are the results of intensely hot fires that burned when Nazca civilization flourished in the area. Woodman wondered if these fires were originally ignited by pre-Columbian aviators to inflate their balloons with hot air. Putting this speculation to the test, Woodman and his colleagues, fellow professional balloonists from the United States, built a hot air balloon designed to resemble Gushmal's Sparrow and the deltoid miniature still flown by Andean natives. The American scientists restricted their experiment to materials known to have been used by pre-Inca peoples. These included finely woven textiles, straw ropes, and a reed boat of the kind well known from Bolivia's Lake Titicaca, which served as the most likely gondola. Even the ground fires for providing hot air were stoked only with desert wood close at hand. Nothing belonging to modern times was included in the undertaking. At dawn on November 25, 1975, the massive envelope of Woodman's balloon, Condor 1, inflated with 80,000 cubic feet of smoke, then ascended at 18 feet per second, bearing Woodman and companion aloft to almost 400 feet above the Nazca Plain. From that altitude, the awe-inspiring drawings of a vanished prehistoric race came into perfect perspective and proportion. As Woodman later wrote, the sun had just cleared the mountains and now flooded the fantastic scene below. Surely, I thought the men who created these lines had to have seen them like this, with the shadows of dawn etching their magnificent art. For those 2 minutes we were alone with Nazca, we had flown back in time as much as we had climbed into the sky. After the 20th century balloonists bumped down to a soft landing in the desert, one of them remarked, "Up there, just now, I had the feeling we weren't the first ever to have flown with the wind above Nazca." Woodman capably demonstrated that the ancient Peruvians could have manufactured and flown a hot air balloon. They actually did so was not proved, but Condor 1's success, the model aerostats flown for unknown centuries by native South Americans, for whom Gushmal seems to have obtained the prototypes for his balloons, and Andean traditions of human flight, the remains of ancient bonfires of the geoglyphs themselves, and the fact that the lines there may only be properly appreciated from several hundred feet above them, persuasively argue on behalf of Peruvian flight during the ancient past, that a people sophisticated enough to create Andean civilization should have possessed the ability to achieve human flight may lie outside the box of modern archaeology, but appears to be nonetheless true. The Nazca hot air balloons were certainly the privilege of upper-class passengers, perhaps reserved exclusively for royalty, flights were probably undertaken for religious purposes during important sky worshiping ceremonies in view of the Nazca lines were popularized by Erich von Däniken, the ancient astronaut theorist who insisted that they had been laid out many thousands of years ago by visitors from another planet as runways for spaceships. Although Woodman dismissed this juvenile fantasy, he nonetheless believed that the pteroglyphs could only be appreciated from an aerial perspective. At the other extreme, mainstream scholars assumed that they were sacrificial offerings only, not made to be seen by their creators, but meant for viewing exclusively by the gods who lived in the sky. I love how they can't see that that's one and the same. Idiots. Such conventional speculation, as baseless as it is unconvincing, did not sit well with Woodman, who was unable to shake off the logical, no less officially impossible conclusion that the ancient South Americans had somehow achieved manned flight, the only means by which they could observe their gargantuan art tableau spread across the Peruvian desert. It did not make sense to him that they should have gone to the immense trouble of executing such a large collection, only to deny themselves any opportunity of ever seeing it. No matter how deep their devotion to the gods, the very notion seemed contrary to fundamental human nature, regardless of cultural and temporal differences separating our times from the prehistoric Nazca. Woodman began researching possibilities, however unlikely, for pre-Columbian aviation, an investigation that led him to the forgotten story of Bartolomeu de Gusmão, a no less mysterious figure, it turned out, than El Vorador's own early 18th century balloon. Born 1685 in Brazil of Portuguese parents, Gusmão was educated at his native city of Santos by Jesuit fathers. It's so crazy. I did not know that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever even heard of this Gusmão guy before. But I don't know what it was when I was reading that part a minute ago when they said that they mentioned Erich von Däniken being, the guy talking about the Nazca lines, and all I could get in my head was that clip of von Däniken from Coast to Coast AM where he says, "And yes, I was trained by the Jesuits." So isn't that an interesting coincidence that somehow this Gusmão guy, the story of him is somehow connected to these ancient aviators of Brazil, and he would be Jesuit trained just as von Däniken is. Very, very interesting stuff. And again, when you see the connections to this ancient alien stuff and this the people who seem to be the experts having extensive ties to the order of the Jesuit train agents. And they train their agents not to be out and outwardly appear that they are working for the priest class, but they indeed are. But part of their training, part of the Jesuit training, is training them to be good actors. And it's funny when you look at how many actors, there are connected. I mean, from Charlie Sheen, and what about that clip I have where Alex Jones' own wife says, "Oh, he's a great actor." Oh, and he just happens to be friends with, Hutton Gibson, Mel Gibson's father, former Jesuit priest. On and on and on with the connections. Of course, he's had John McManus on. John McManus was Jesuit trained as well. So always these connections to, conspiracy stuff and all this and ancient alien stuff with these priest class Jesuit guys. He complemented his advanced education with them at their seminary in Belém, where he excelled in languages, mathematics, and physics. It is important to understand that the Jesuits were great explorers of Brazil and the rest of South America. Motivated by missionary zeal, they traveled throughout the continent where no modern Europeans had ever gone before. Right. Under the guise of going there to, they're going on a mission. They're missionarying, going down and trying to spread the word, the gospel. Bullshit. Those guys were on expeditions to find knowledge and to find artifacts, just like everybody else that does those expeditions is. And they do it under the guise of, missionary work. That's bullshit. It is all missionary work from the Catholic Church has always been a front to set up these and find these artifacts that may, present themselves as a problem to their religious hierarchy. The Catholic Fathers studied native myths, customs, and behavior, then passed the information on to their students as aids to successful evangelism. As part of his schooling, Gushmal not only heard cultural news from the friars, but participated in several jungle expeditions himself. Either during one of these missionary forays or from veteran Jesuit accounts, young Bartholomew learned some very peculiar details about the natives of the rainforest. Oh, shit. Motherfucker. Y'all seeing where this is going? So this guy, wow, that's telling, isn't it?